He spent 3 years saving her from every man her mother chose, and never once told her she was the only one he wanted. Ryan Carter was 32 years old, a single father, and the most trusted person in Victoria Hale's life. He rescheduled meetings that didn't exist. He invented crises that never happened. He did it every single time her mother lined up another perfect man with perfect money and a perfectly empty smile. What he never did, not once in 3 years, was tell her the truth, that the only emergency he was ever really trying to prevent was losing her to someone who didn't deserve her. If this story already has your attention, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The emergency call came at 7:43 on a Thursday evening, which was when Ryan Carter was sitting on the edge of his daughter's bed, reading the same 3 pages of a picture book for the 4th night in a row because Lily, age 6, had decided that repetition was the highest form of love. "Again," she said. "We just did it." The duck part. Lily. "Daddy," the duck part. He turned back to page 7. The duck part. He read it with the same voices he always used, the low one for the father duck and the slightly embarrassing high one for the small duck, and Lily pressed her face into his arm the way she did when something made her feel safe. He finished the page. She was already half asleep. He set the book down on the nightstand next to her water cup and her small pile of drawings and a photograph she kept there. The two of them at the park last summer, Lily, mid-laugh, Ryan looking at her instead of the camera. He tucked the blanket up to her chin. She didn't stir. His phone buzzed. He picked it up in the hallway, pulling the door almost closed behind him. SOS. My mother just confirmed the Whitmore dinner for Saturday. He's 54, Ryan. He collects vintage wine and has opinions about it. He stood in the narrow hallway of his apartment, still holding the picture book, reading the message twice. Then he typed back. How bad is the OptiCore server situation? 3 seconds passed. There is no OptiCore server situation. There is now, he typed. Critical failure. Estimated 12-hour recovery window. You'll need to be on a call Saturday evening. The response came immediately, a single word. You're impossible. Then, after a pause, thank you. He set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment in the quiet of his apartment. The dishes from dinner were stacked in the drying rack. Lily's backpack hung by the door with one strap slightly longer than the other because she refused to let him fix it. A permission slip for a school field trip was pinned under a magnet on the refrigerator and had been there for 9 days, unsigned, because he kept meaning to deal with it and somehow hadn't. He fixed the permission slip. He signed it. He put it in the front pocket of her backpack so it would actually get to school. Then he went to bed, and he did not let himself think about the fact that this was the 7th time in 4 months. Ryan Carter had not planned on becoming anyone's executive assistant. He had a business degree from a state school he'd worked 2 jobs to get through, a certificate in project management he'd earned online during the 6 months after Lily was born, when he had no job and too much time, and a terror that lived in his chest like something with teeth. He had spent his late 20s doing competent, unremarkable work at a mid-sized logistics company, managing schedules and coordinating vendors, and being the person who caught things before they fell. He had not planned on being a single father at 26 either, but life rarely consulted people before making its decisions. Lily's mother left when Lily was 4 months old. There was no dramatic scene, no screaming fight. There was just a morning when Ryan woke up and she was gone. And on the kitchen table there was a note that said she was sorry, that she loved Lily but couldn't do this, that she hoped he understood. He had stood there in his kitchen with a 4-month-old on his hip and read that note 3 times and then folded it very carefully and put it in a drawer and never read it again. He understood. He didn't forgive her for it, but he understood. What followed were 2 years that he rarely talked about and never glamorized. Daycare costs that ate most of his salary, a landlord who raised the rent twice in 18 months, a sister in Columbus who helped when she could, but had 3 kids of her own and a husband who worked long hours. Ryan had learned to sleep in fragments, to cook things that were cheap and that Lily would actually eat, to be present at 6 a.m. when he was running on 4 hours, to hold everything together by force of habit and the knowledge that there was no one else to do it. He had met Victoria Hale at a career fair he almost didn't attend, because Lily had an ear infection that week, and the antibiotics were $43, and he was doing the math in his head about what else he could move around to cover it. He'd gone anyway. He'd worn the one good suit jacket he owned over a shirt that was slightly too small because he'd bought it before the years of stress eating and hadn't replaced it yet. Victoria Hale had been there representing Hale Technologies, which at that point was 6 years old, valued somewhere above $8 billion, and growing at a pace that made financial journalists use words like unprecedented and alarming in the same sentence. She had looked at his resume for about 45 seconds. Then she looked at him. "You caught 3 errors in our booth materials within 2 minutes of standing here," she said. "The wrong year on the company founding, a typo in the mission statement, and a font inconsistency that almost no one would notice." "I notice things," he said. "Why logistics?" "It was where I could find work." "What would you have done instead?" He thought about it. Something that mattered. She hired him 3 days later. The salary was more than he'd made in the previous 2 years combined. He accepted without negotiating because he was afraid if he pushed, she'd change her mind, and he needed the money too badly to risk it. He negotiated better terms 6 months later, when he'd proven enough that she needed him to stay. That was 3 years ago. What? The thing about working closely with someone for 3 years? Really closely. Not just sharing office space, but being the person who managed their entire world, was that you learned things about them that had nothing to do with their professional life. Ryan knew that Victoria Hale drank her coffee with exactly 1 sugar before 10 a.m. and none after, because caffeine made her heart race and she wouldn't admit it. He knew she kept a stress ball in her desk drawer that she'd never once used because she thought it made her look weak, but she bought a new one every time the old one got too worn. He knew she read annual reports at night when she couldn't sleep, not because she was anxious about numbers, but because the structure of them calmed her, the way some people read fiction. He knew she was lonely, not visibly, not in a way she would ever say out loud, but in the space between things, in the way she'd find reasons to extend a meeting or keep a phone call going a little longer, in the way she'd sometimes stop by his desk at the end of the day, not because she needed anything, but because the building had mostly emptied out, and silence was harder for her than she wanted it to be. He knew this because he recognized it. He had his own version of the same loneliness, the kind that lives specifically in the life of someone who has responsibility without partnership, who carries everything and shares the weight of it with no one. He did not let himself think about what that recognition meant. Victoria Hale was his employer. She was more honestly the person his entire livelihood depended on. She was brilliant and driven and sometimes infuriatingly difficult, and she trusted him in a way he'd never been trusted by anyone professionally, and the boundaries of that were clear and they were there for good reasons, and Ryan was extremely careful to observe them. He observed them carefully, every single day. Eleanor Hale was a problem that had no clean solution. Ryan had met her 6 times in 3 years, and each meeting had confirmed the same thing. Eleanor was not a bad person. She was a frightened one. She had raised a daughter who had built one of the most successful technology companies in the country, and somehow that felt like failure to her, because her daughter was 30 years old and not married, and the older Eleanor got, the more that felt like something that needed to be fixed. The men she chose were always the same. Older, usually. Wealthy, always. Established in ways that Eleanor valued. Real estate, finance, old family money. Men who would provide stability, or what Eleanor understood stability to mean. Men whose success was legible to her. The problem was that Victoria Hale didn't need anyone to provide for her. She provided for herself on a scale that made most of these men's net worths look like a rounding error. What she needed, what Ryan could see she needed even if no one was saying it, was someone who actually knew her, not her net worth or her title or her magazine profile. Her. That was not something Eleanor seemed to be selecting for. "The Whitmore dinner," Victoria said the next morning, dropping into the chair across from his desk like she'd been defeated by the act of walking through the building. "She's been planning this one for 2 months. He's a wine distributor. Apparently he's very successful." "I have the server crisis covered," Ryan said without looking up from the document he was editing. "Ryan, there will be an incident report and everything. I can't keep canceling on these people. My mother is going to figure it out eventually." He put down his pen. Victoria was looking at him with the expression she got when she was genuinely worried about something and trying to make it look like general frustration. Her dark hair was down today. She wore it down when she was tired, pulled back when she was preparing for a fight. It was down. "What would you say to him?" Ryan asked. "If you went." "What?" "Whitmore. If you sat through the dinner, what would you talk about?" She stared at him. "Wine, presumably." "Do you know anything about wine?" "I know that I don't care about wine." "Okay. Ryan, I'm just asking what the plan is if you go." She slouched back in the chair, which was something she never did in front of anyone except him, and let out a long breath. "There's no plan. There never is. I sit there for 2 hours making conversation about things I don't care about with a man I don't know while my mother watches from across the table like I'm performing a trick. She won't be there Saturday. She might as well be. She coaches him beforehand. I've met enough of these men to know." Ryan said nothing for a moment. Outside his office window, downtown Chicago was doing its mid-morning thing. Gray sky, delivery trucks, a cluster of people waiting for a walk signal. He'd looked at that view for 3 years now and still found it easier to think while looking at it than at most other things. "The server crisis runs until Sunday morning," he said. "You'll need to be available by phone." Victoria looked at him. Something moved across her face that he didn't look at too long. "Thank you," she said, for the second time in 12 hours. Then she stood up, smoothed her jacket, and walked out. He turned back to the document he was editing. He did not think about the way she'd looked at him just then. He was very disciplined about what he allowed himself to think about. Ryan's daughter Lily had a gift for making everything feel immediate. She was 6 going on 37, with her father's dark eyes and a complete absence of his tendency to keep things to himself. When something was on her mind, it came out of her mouth more or less immediately, which Ryan sometimes found exhausting and always found clarifying. "Your phone keeps buzzing," she said Saturday morning, sitting across from him at the kitchen table eating cereal with the focused intensity she brought to every meal. "I know." "Work?" "Always work." She considered this. "Does your boss know you have a kid?" "She does." "Does she care?" He looked up from his phone. Lily was watching him with the direct gaze she got when she was actually asking something, not just filling the silence. "Yeah," he said. "She does." "How do you know?" He thought about it. "She gave me the morning off when you had your tonsil thing last year. Didn't ask for a doctor's note or anything." Lily seemed to accept this as sufficient evidence. "What's she like?" "Busy, smart, a little intimidating until you know her." "Is she nice?" He thought about that more carefully, because nice was a complicated word and Lily was too perceptive for a dishonest answer. "She's good," he said finally. "That's different from nice, but it matters more." Lily chewed her cereal thoughtfully. "Is she your friend?" The buzzing from his phone continued. Victoria was monitoring the fake server crisis he'd constructed, and she'd be sending updates back and forth with his fabricated IT team all evening, while Raymond Whitmore and his wine opinions sat across a restaurant table from an empty chair. "Yeah," Ryan said. "She is. But she's also your boss." "Both can be true." Lily looked unconvinced. At 6, categories were supposed to stay separate. He didn't push it. He drove her to her friend Mia's house for the afternoon, where she would spend 4 hours doing whatever 6-year-olds did when left largely unsupervised in a backyard, and then he drove back to his apartment and sat at the kitchen table and worked through the afternoon managing the fake crisis so Victoria would have cover. It occurred to him, not for the first time, that this was a strange thing to do for someone who paid him a salary. Creating fictional IT disasters so a 30-year-old billionaire could avoid her mother's dating arrangements was not in any job description he'd ever read. He was doing it because she'd asked, and because he was good at it, and because he kept this in a place he didn't examine closely. It was the thing that made him feel most directly useful to her. That was probably worth examining. He chose not to. At 8:20 that evening, his phone rang with her actual voice, which was different from a text, and he sat up straighter without meaning to. "The crisis is resolved," she said. "Already?" "I told my mother the server team got it fixed early. She sounded suspicious, but she couldn't prove anything." A pause. I'm in my car in a parking garage. I told my driver I needed 15 minutes. Are you okay? Another pause, shorter. She called me this afternoon, before the dinner would have happened. She said she was just checking in, but she spent 11 minutes telling me about Raymond Whitmore's wine collection and his property in Napa and his son who just graduated from Duke. His son. To demonstrate, I think, that he is a man capable of raising successful children. Ryan pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. What did you say? I said I had a server emergency. Good use of the material? I thought so. He could hear her breathing, the slight echo of the parking garage around her. I hate this, Ryan. I know. I'm 30 years old. I run a company. I know what I want out of life. Or I'm figuring it out, which is close enough. And she still does this like I'm 17 and need to be pointed in the right direction. She thinks she's helping. That doesn't make it less exhausting. A pause. Is Lily asleep? The subject change was something she did when she was done processing something and needed to move on. He'd noticed it 2 years ago and had never pointed it out because that felt like too much knowledge to volunteer. She's at her friend's until 9, he said. I'm picking her up. She's going to be terrifying when she's older. She's already terrifying. Victoria laughed, not her professional laugh, the contained one she used in meetings, but her actual laugh, which was a little louder and less elegant and much more real. Ryan leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and kept his face from doing anything he would have to explain. Get some sleep, he said. I will. Thank you. For all of it. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. Monday morning came with a specific kind of dread attached to it, which Ryan identified before he was fully awake as Eleanor Hale had called the main office line at 7:58 a.m., which meant she wanted to speak to someone before business hours officially started, which meant she was making a point. He was at his desk by 8:12. The message was already waiting. He called her back. Professional habit. Mr. Carter, she said, and her voice carried the particular careful warmth of someone who wanted something. I was hoping you might have a moment. Of course. I understand there was a technology issue Saturday evening. A significant one, yes. The team worked through the night. A pause. It does seem that these emergencies happen with some regularity on the evenings when Victoria has personal commitments. Ryan said nothing. He was good at silence. I'm just making an observation, Eleanor said. I have tremendous respect for your dedication to my daughter's company. I simply wonder if the dedication extends, perhaps, further than the professional sphere. I'm not sure I follow. I think you might. Her voice stayed pleasant. This was a woman who had learned to deliver threats at a consistent room temperature. Victoria needs stability, Mr. Carter. Real stability. The kind that comes from the right partner, the right family, the right foundation. She works too hard and she's too isolated, and she deserves someone who can give her all the things that, well, all the things an employee, however skilled, cannot. The word employee landed with weight she intended it to carry. I care about Victoria's well-being, he said, keeping his voice level. As an employer, of course. A small pause. I hope you'll consider, going forward, whether some of your time and creative energy might be better directed toward company matters. I'll keep that in mind. I thought you might. Her tone warmed again, friendly now that the point had been made. You're very good at your job, Mr. Carter. Victoria's lucky to have you. She hung up. Ryan set his phone down on his desk and looked at it for a moment. Then he pulled up the incident report for the fake OptiCore server crisis and checked it over for inconsistencies, because if Eleanor was paying attention now, the details needed to be airtight. He told Victoria about the call that afternoon. He left out the exact wording about what an employee could and couldn't provide. But he got the substance of it across, and he watched her face go through several things in quick succession. First, not surprised. Then, angry but controlled, the jaw-set kind. Then, something he couldn't read, which happened sometimes, a look that he consciously did not try to interpret. She doesn't know for certain, Victoria said. No, she suspects. I'll talk to her. You don't have to. Ryan. Her voice was patient in a way that wasn't quite patience. "She's my mother. I'll handle it." He nodded. She stood up from the chair she'd been sitting in, but she didn't move toward the door. She stood there for a moment, and he could feel her looking at him, and he kept his eyes on the keyboard in front of him. "What she said to you," Victoria said. "It's fine." "It's not. She's not wrong that—" He stopped. "What?" He shook his head. "Nothing. I'll get the quarterly reports formatted before end of day." A pause. "Okay," she said. But she didn't move for another 2 seconds, which he counted without looking up, and then she walked out, and the door didn't quite close all the way, and he sat there looking at the quarterly reports without seeing any of the numbers. 3 weeks later, Eleanor Hale produced a new name from what seemed like an inexhaustible supply. The dinner was on a Friday, a rooftop restaurant downtown, somewhere with a 3-month wait and a wine list that required a separate booklet. The man's name was Derek Callum, 46, tech investor, recently divorced, the kind of person who appeared in the financial press with phrases like savvy and well-positioned attached to his name. Ryan invented a supply chain disruption affecting their Singapore operations. He had an entire fabricated email chain prepared. Victoria texted at 4 p.m. She watched me leave the office. She knows I have no reason to cancel. Ryan looked at that message for a long moment. Then he texted back. "Then go. You can leave early." A long pause. "I don't want to go." He didn't type anything for a minute. He looked at the Singapore supply chain disruption he had open in a separate window, fully built, ready to send. "You don't have to," he typed. "I have the materials ready." "It's not sustainable," she wrote back. "She's going to keep doing this." "I know. At some point I have to deal with it directly." "Yes, but not tonight." He closed the supply chain window and opened the email chain and sent it. At 6:45 that evening, he picked Lily up from the after-school program, and she got in the car with paint on her left hand and something that looked like marker on her cheek and an expression of deep personal satisfaction. "Good day," he said. "We did a mural," she said. "I did the sky part." "How's the sky look?" "Really good. I used 4 different blues." He pulled out of the parking lot into the start of rush hour traffic. Lily was already unwrapping a granola bar from her backpack with the focused efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this for 3 hours. "Dad," she said through a mouthful, "don't talk while you're chewing." She chewed, swallowed, tried again. "Dad, at Mia's last weekend she has this really big dog." "I know, a golden retriever. His name is Biscuit." "I know. Can we get a dog?" He merged into the center lane. "We've talked about this. We talked about it like a year ago. Things change." "My answer hasn't. But why?" "Our apartment's not big enough and I work long hours. I could take care of it." "You're 6. "Almost 7. Still 6. She finished her granola bar in offended silence. He let it sit for a block. "When you're older and we have more space," he said. "When's that?" "When things settle down." She looked at him with her direct, unsparing 6-year-old gaze. "Things are never going to settle down, Dad." He didn't have a good answer for that, so he didn't say anything, and she went back to looking out the window at the city going by, and he drove them home through the slow Friday evening traffic. 2 days later, Victoria came to his desk at 4:50 p.m., which was the specific time she came by when she had something to say that wasn't strictly professional. She sat down in the chair across from him and set her phone face down on his desk, which she did when she wanted to not look at it. "My mother called her contact at the firm," she said. Ryan looked up. "Not to complain about you, to check your background." A pause. "She knows about Lily." He kept his face still. "Okay. She's been careful to not say it directly, but the subtext is clear. She thinks—" Victoria stopped. "She thinks the situation makes you unsuitable." The situation. Single father. Relatively modest income relative to— She has a whole scale, Ryan. In her head, there's a scale of what's appropriate. He nodded once. "What did you say to her?" "I told her your personal life was not her concern." That's diplomatic. I was less diplomatic than that, actually. She looked at her phone even though it was face down. She's not going to stop. I know. She's decided you're the problem. Victoria looked back up at him. That's not a position I share. I know that. Do you? Something in her voice shifted slightly, a question underneath the question. He met her eyes. She was watching him with an expression he recognized and had learned to not respond to. It was the look she got late at night over coffee when they had been talking about something real and the conversation had moved past the point where professional distance was doing much work. It was the look he filed carefully away and did not let himself think about in the light of day. I know that, he said again. She held his gaze for one beat longer than necessary. Then she picked up her phone and stood up. Good night, Ryan. Good night. He watched her walk out. He sat at his desk for a while after the office emptied, looking at the quarterly reports he still had to finish, and the evening light changed color outside the window, and he thought about what his daughter had said in the car on Friday. Things are never going to settle down, Dad, and thought that she was probably right, that she was almost certainly right, and that being right and knowing what to do about it were two entirely separate problems. He finished the reports. He turned off his desk lamp. He went home to make dinner for his daughter, and he was careful, on the drive home, to not let himself want anything that wasn't already his. The month that followed was the most difficult stretch of the 3 years, and not because anything obvious happened. There were no scenes, no confrontations. Eleanor's pressure operated the way serious pressure always does, not as a single force, but as accumulation. A question here, an implication there, a pointed silence in a room where Ryan had been invited but no longer quite felt welcome. She showed up at the office twice in 1 week, which was unusual, and both times she managed to place herself in a position where Ryan was in her eye line, watching him work, not saying anything, but not having to. Victoria handled it. She always handled it. But he could see the toll it was taking, the way she came in some mornings with a tightness around her eyes that he knew wasn't from work, the way she'd sometimes cut a phone call short and sit very still for a moment after hanging up before going back to whatever she'd been doing. He asked once, carefully, "How are things with your mother?" "Fine," she said, and then, "You know how they are." He did. He left it there. What he didn't leave, what kept presenting itself to him in the quiet hours, in the space between work tasks, on the drive home, in the pause after Lily's bedtime, was something he'd been managing for a long time and was finding harder to manage. He told himself a lot of true things over 3 years, that Victoria was his employer, that the way she looked at him sometimes meant nothing, or could mean nothing, or should mean nothing, that the late-night conversations over cold coffee were the natural byproduct of proximity and shared stress, not anything else, that what he felt was gratitude, respect, something in the neighborhood of deep professional loyalty. These were all true things. They were true the way a map is true, accurate to the territory, useful, reliable, and completely insufficient when you were standing in the actual place, in the dark, without the map doing much good. He was in love with Victoria Hale. He had probably been in love with Victoria Hale for somewhere between 1 and 2.5 years, and he had constructed an elaborate interior architecture around that fact to make sure it stayed exactly where it was, which was nowhere near anywhere it could do damage. He had a daughter who depended on him. He had a job that kept them housed and fed and stable. He had a friendship that was, next to Lily, the most important thing in his daily life. And there was no version of any of this that ended well if he let what he actually felt get anywhere near the surface. So he kept it where it was. He was very good at keeping things where they were. It was possibly the most developed skill he had. The Friday evening dinner that changed everything started, like most things that change everything, as a completely ordinary situation. Victoria had been pressured into attending a fundraiser gala, board obligations, major donors, the kind of event that looked optional on paper and wasn't. And Eleanor had made sure Derek Callum had a ticket and a seat at her daughter's table. Ryan found out at 3 p.m., which was too late to construct a convincing technical emergency. He'd been at a vendor meeting all morning, phone in his pocket, and by the time he was back at his desk, the arrangements were confirmed, and Eleanor had sent a note to Victoria's personal assistant, going around Ryan specifically, he noted, to confirm. Victoria came to his desk at 3:30. She didn't sit down. "I know," he said, before she said anything. "There's no way out of this one." "No." She stood there with her arms crossed, not looking at him, looking past him at the window. "I can manage it," she said in a voice that was working harder than the words required. "It's one dinner." "It's one dinner," he agreed. "I'll be professional and pleasant and leave early." "That's exactly what you should do." She looked at him then, and he held the look, and there was something behind it he couldn't read or was choosing not to. "I'll have my driver bring the car around at 10, he said. "If you text me, I'll have a reason ready to pull you out." "Okay." "Victoria." She stopped. "You're going to be fine." She nodded once, the compact professional nod, and walked back toward her office, and Ryan watched her go and thought about the architecture he'd built and whether it would hold the night. He picked Lily up from the sitters at 9. She was already half asleep, heavy in his arms when he carried her to the car, and she made a small sound when he buckled her in and then was out again by the time they pulled out of the driveway. He drove home through the city at night, Chicago putting on its usual show through the car windows, and Lily breathed softly in the back seat, and his phone stayed quiet. He'd been home for 20 minutes, Lily in bed, when the text came through. "Can you come?" He looked at that for a second. Then, "Where are you?" An address, a restaurant he knew by reputation, 3 blocks from Millennium Park. Then, "I'm outside. I can't go back in." He was in his car in 4 minutes. He called the sitter, got voicemail, called his neighbor Mrs. Reeves, who had an understanding with him for exactly this kind of situation. Older woman, light sleeper, willing to come sit in his apartment while Lily slept. She was there in 8 minutes. He left before she'd taken off her coat. He drove fast. Not recklessly, but faster than he usually drove, with a feeling in his chest that he was identifying as professional concern and nothing more. He pulled up to the restaurant at 10:22 and saw her immediately. Victoria, standing outside the main entrance in the dark blue dress she'd been wearing when she left the office, her phone in her hand, and she was not crying, but she had the look of someone who had been keeping themselves from it with some effort. He double-parked and got out of the car. "What happened?" She looked up at him with an expression he'd never quite seen on her before, something that was anger and relief simultaneously, and she said, "He told me my mother said I was ready to settle down." He used the phrase, "ready to settle down," Ryan, like I'm a horse. He absorbed this. She coached him, Victoria said. Every talking point. He asked me, and I am not making this up, whether I'd considered that a woman in my position might benefit from having someone to share the burden. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't, the phone turning over and over in her fingers. He said burden. Ryan breathed in, breathed out. "Where is he now?" Inside, presumably confused, "I told him I needed air and walked out, and I haven't gone back." "Okay." "I'm not going back in." "I know. You don't have to." She looked at him then, and something happened in the space between them that he recognized and had always looked away from. He stood very still. The street was quiet. This part of downtown on a Friday night was theater crowd and restaurant crowd, people moving around them in the background. And he and Victoria stood in front of the restaurant, and the city did its thing around them, and he was holding the architecture in place with everything he had. "Ryan," she said. "Let's get you out of here," he said. "I'll bring the car around." "Stop!" He stopped. She was looking at him with the particular directness she used when she'd made a decision, when the deliberating was over and she'd arrived somewhere. It was her boardroom look, but not quite. It was older than that, more personal than that. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer me honestly. The architecture." He held it. "Has any of this—" She stopped, tried again. "The 7 canceled dinners, the fake emergencies, all of it. Has any of that been—" She couldn't finish the sentence. He could lie. It was the safe answer. It was the answer that kept everything where it was, that preserved the architecture, that protected Lily's school and his salary and the friendship that was worth more to him than the thing underneath it. He stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, and he looked at Victoria Hale, and he understood with complete clarity that the moment had arrived, and that he had 2 choices, and he knew which one was true. "Yes," he said. She didn't move. "Yes," he said again, and his voice wasn't steady, but it was honest. "I've been in love with you for— I don't know exactly when it started. Somewhere in the middle of the second year, maybe earlier. I kept it where it was because you were my employer and I had Lily to think about, and I knew it would. He stopped. I knew it would make everything complicated. She was very still. I'm not telling you this to change anything, he said. I'm telling you because you asked, and because I'm done lying about it. You can decide what to do with it. He waited for the careful professional response, for the version of this where she thanked him for his honesty and they agreed to keep things professional and nothing changed and nothing broke. Instead, Victoria Hale took one short breath and said, I've been in love with you for almost as long. The city kept going. A cab rolled past. Somewhere behind them, inside the restaurant, Derek Callum was presumably ordering dessert. Ryan looked at her. She looked at him. They were standing 3 feet apart on a Chicago sidewalk on a Friday night, and everything he'd been building for years was either falling down or turning into something else, and he couldn't yet tell which. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Neither of them moved. Neither of them knew exactly what came next. But the thing that had been kept where it was for 2 long years was finally out in the air between them, and whatever it cost, it was real, and it was theirs. Neither of them moved for a long moment after that. The city kept doing what cities do. A bus groaned past, someone laughed too loud half a block away, a couple walked between them without noticing or caring, and Ryan and Victoria stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant with the truth finally loose between them and no map for what came next. It was Victoria who moved first. She took a half step back, not away from him exactly, more like she needed the physical space to think, and she pressed her thumb against the edge of her phone and said, I need to not be standing in front of this restaurant. My car's right there. Okay? They walked to the car. He opened the passenger door out of habit, 3 years of the same motion, and she got in, and he went around and got in the driver's side, and he pulled away from the curb without either of them saying where they were going. He just drove, left on Michigan, south toward the lake. Because the lake was what you drove toward in Chicago when you didn't have a destination and needed to think. After a few blocks, Victoria said, How long have you been doing that? Which part? The keeping it where it was. He thought about being honest versus careful, and chose honest because that was apparently what they were doing now. Long enough that it became a habit. I stopped counting. She looked out the passenger window. I thought I was imagining it. Twice I almost said something, and then I'd think about everything it would complicate and decide I'd imagined it. You hadn't. I know that now. He stopped at a red light. The lake was visible in the distance, the flat dark of it, the lights from the far shore blurring at the edges. What do we do? She said. Not a question exactly, more like she was putting it in the air to look at. I don't know. That's not reassuring. I know. He moved through the intersection. I don't have a plan for this. I've spent a year and a half making sure there was no plan for this. She almost laughed. Not quite. Me too. He pulled into a small lot near the waterfront that was mostly empty at this hour, and he put the car in park, and they sat there with the engine off and the lake in front of them, and everything that had just happened settling down around them like dust after something's fallen. There are about 14 reasons this is complicated, he said. At least 14. You're my employer. You're my most senior employee. My daughter, I know, has a life that depends on my income being stable and my judgment being sound, and I can't. Ryan? Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him. I know all of that. I know it better than you think I do. She turned toward him slightly. I'm not asking you to figure everything out tonight. I'm sitting here trying to understand what the last 3 years actually were. For both of us. He looked at the water. They were real, he said. All of it. The conversations, the late nights, the way you'd come by my desk when you didn't have a work reason to. That was real. Yes. I just never let myself say what it was. Neither did I. A silence that was different from the earlier silences. Not careful, not managed. Just 2 people sitting with something they'd both been carrying for a long time. Lily is the first thing, he said. Always the first thing. I understand that. I need you to actually understand it, not just say you do. Her life doesn't get to be unstable because of a decision I make." Victoria looked at him directly. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight. I'm telling you that I have been sitting across from you for 3 years knowing something was there and pretending I didn't, and I'm tired of pretending." A pause. "That's all I'm saying right now." He looked back at her. Her face in the dark was serious. No performance in it. No professional composure holding anything in place. Just her, which was a different thing from what most people got to see. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. They sat there for a while longer, and eventually he drove her home, and he walked her to her building entrance because the city was late and empty, and it was what he did. And at the door she stopped and turned and looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight. For all of the nights before tonight. You don't have to thank me for any of it. I know I don't have to." She held his gaze. "I wanted to." He drove home through the empty streets with the windows down and the cold air coming in, and Mrs. Reeves was asleep on his couch, under the spare blanket he kept on the armchair, and Lily was breathing in her room in the deep, uncomplicated way of children who have no idea what their parents are carrying. He stood in the doorway and looked at her for a minute. He did not have a plan. He had a truth he'd been sitting on for 2 years and a woman who'd said she'd been sitting on the same truth, and he had a daughter, and tomorrow would require him to figure out what to do with all 3 of those things. He went to bed. He didn't sleep for a long time. The weekend passed with the particular surreal quality of days that come after something has shifted. The surface exactly the same, the ground underneath it different. Saturday, Ryan took Lily to her soccer practice, which she attended with loud enthusiasm and complete disregard for the actual rules of soccer, and he sat on the metal bleachers with the other parents and drank bad coffee from a paper cup and watched her chase the ball and did not check his phone more than 3 times. On Sunday, they grocery shopped together, which was Lily's favorite errand and his least, because she had opinions about every item and would defend them at length. "We need the orange juice with the extra pulp," she said. "We have orange juice at home." "That one's almost empty." "It has 1/3 of the bottle left." "That's almost empty." He put the no-pulp orange juice in the cart. She put it back and replaced it with the extra pulp. He looked at it for a moment and left it. "Dad," she said 2 aisles later, in the voice she used when she was observing something, "you're weird today." "I'm always weird." "Differently weird." He looked at her. She was wearing the jacket with the missing button on the 3rd buttonhole, which he kept meaning to fix, and she had a small smear of something on her chin that he was fairly certain was peanut butter from breakfast. She was looking up at him with her direct, unsettling gaze. "Long week," he said. "It's Sunday. Long Friday." She seemed to accept this. She moved on to the cereal aisle, where she had equally strong opinions. He thought about what Victoria had said in the car. "I have been sitting across from you for 3 years knowing something was there and pretending I didn't." He thought about it the way you think about something that has changed the geometry of a room, noticing the new shape, walking around its edges. Monday at the office had a different weight to it. Not visible to anyone else, probably, but he felt it from the moment he walked in the way the ordinary morning tasks seemed to take up less space than usual, leaving too much room for the thing that was now acknowledged and unresolved. Victoria arrived at 8:40, 12 minutes later than her usual arrival, which for her was nearly late. She was in a dark jacket, hair up, the working face in place, and when she came through the main entrance, she met his eyes for exactly 1 second, enough to register something and then move past it. And then she was at her office door. "Can you push the 9 o'clock to 10?" she said without stopping. "I need 30 minutes. Done." "And the Morrow deck? Did the new version come in?" "On your desk." "Thank you." She went into her office. He pushed the 9 o'clock. He handled the 3 emails that had come in overnight. He did the work, which was reliable and necessary, and the same as it had always been. And he let the work do what it always did, which was hold him in the present tense. At 11:15, she called him in. He sat across from her desk, the same chair, the same desk, the same view of the Chicago skyline out the window behind her. Everything was the same, and they both knew it wasn't. I've been thinking about the right way to handle this, she said. So have I. I don't want to do the thing where we pretend Friday didn't happen and it becomes this. She made a slight motion with her hand. Thing we manage around forever. Agreed. And I don't want to rush into something that. She stopped, started again. I'm not good at this. I want to be clear about that up front. I'm a person who runs a company and is good at decisions with data behind them, and this has no data. I don't know how to do this. I don't either. Good, she said, which surprised him slightly. I'd be suspicious if you had a plan. He almost smiled. I thought about it. Of course you did. I didn't come up with one. She looked at him across the desk, and whatever the professional composure was holding, it wasn't holding everything. There was something tired behind it, and something careful, and something that he recognized from years of watching her face in unguarded moments. I want to try, she said, to see what this is outside of all the structures around it. I want to try carefully and slowly and without making anything that matters worse. Lily. I know about Lily. I'm not asking to be anything to Lily. I'm asking if you and I can spend some time being honest about what we are to each other. That's it. He sat with that. Outside, Chicago went about its business, indifferent and busy. Yes, he said. She nodded once, not triumphant, just settled. Nothing changes at work, he said. Nothing visible. Not as a cover, because it actually can't change at work. The way this office functions depends on people being able to trust the process, not, Ryan, I know. She held up one hand slightly. I've thought about this too. I'm not suggesting we stop doing our jobs. Okay. I'm suggesting that on the evenings when you don't have Lily, and I don't have my mother's latest project scheduled for me, we have dinner, we talk, we see what this actually is. It was modest. It was careful. It was probably the most reasonable version of a completely unreasonable situation. Okay, he said. She picked up the Morrow deck. The meeting was back on, in a sense. The Singapore numbers in Section 3 are off, she said. The variance is wrong. He stood. I'll have them corrected by 2. He walked out and pulled the door almost closed behind him and sat down at his desk and looked at the Singapore numbers and found the variance error in about 90 seconds. And then he sat there for a while with his hands on the keyboard and thought about what carefully and slowly looked like in practice. He wasn't sure, but he was going to find out. The first dinner was the Wednesday, 3 weeks later, because between his schedule and hers and the logistics of Lily's week, there was no available evening before that. It was nothing elaborate. A Thai restaurant near her building that she'd mentioned in passing 6 months ago and he'd remembered without meaning to. They arrived separately. They sat across from each other at a small table with a single candle and a laminated menu, and it was nothing like anything either of them had been building in their heads for 3 years, which turned out to be the right thing. This is strange, she said, about 10 minutes in. Yes. We've had dinner before, dozens of times, work functions, client events. That was different. How? He thought about it. At work events, I'm there to manage the situation. I'm never completely off. He picked up his water glass. This is the first time in 3 years I don't have a task. She looked at him like that landed somewhere specific. I didn't realize that's what it was like for you. You have a whole office full of people managing situations for you. That's what I do. I know that. I meant, she paused. I didn't realize you were never not doing it, even when it just looked like we were talking. It wasn't entirely strategic, he said. I actually wanted to be there. I just also had a professional function the whole time. And now? Now I just want to be here. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm not easy to be around. I want to say that clearly, up front, not as some false modesty thing, but as, she turned her water glass. I know how I am. I work too much. I find it hard to turn off the thing in my head that's always running numbers. I'm not good at being vulnerable. I've been told multiple times that I'm difficult to read, and my mother is a whole separate situation that comes with the relationship, whether I want it to or not. I've worked with you for 3 years, he said. Exactly. So you know. I know. I'm here anyway. She looked at him, and something softened in it, and she looked younger when she wasn't managing everything. Not younger exactly, but more like the person she was before she got good at managing everything. "I have a child," he said. "A specific, opinionated child who has feelings about orange juice pulp and wants a dog and takes up about 60% of my mental bandwidth at any given moment. My social life is essentially non-existent, and my apartment is small, and I have a permission slip problem. I keep letting things sit too long. Permission slips. School forms. I always mean to handle them, and I don't. I have a team of people who manage my paperwork. I have a refrigerator magnet." She laughed. The real one, the undiplomatically loud one. And something in the dinner settled down into what it was supposed to be, which was two people who already knew each other trying to figure out if they knew each other in the right way. They stayed for 2.5 hours. He drove her home. At the building entrance, she stopped and turned, and this time she reached over and put her hand against his arm, briefly, just a few seconds, and said goodnight. He watched the door close behind her. He sat in the car for a moment before starting the engine. It was something. He wasn't sure what yet, but it was something. The Wednesdays became a pattern, and then occasionally Fridays when both schedules allowed, and then sometimes a Sunday morning when Lily was at her aunt's in Columbus and Victoria didn't have board obligations. They were careful about it at the office, which mostly meant they were exactly the same at the office. Same exchanges, same professional register, same rhythm of work, and whatever the evenings were lived in a separate room of things. It was strange, and also not strange at all. Ryan had spent 3 years talking to this woman about things that mattered. The conversation didn't change much when the context changed. What changed was what he allowed himself to notice. Her laugh, unguarded. The way she held a coffee cup in both hands when she was really thinking about something. The way she got quieter rather than louder when something was actually bothering her. The opposite of what most people would have guessed. She was not easy. He had told her he knew that, and he did, but knowing and experiencing were different things. She had a habit of withdrawing when she felt uncertain that could read as coldness if you didn't know her. She sometimes canceled without enough notice. Not from thoughtlessness, but from the genuine unpredictability of running a company that size. And she was not always good at apologizing for it. She kept things compartmentalized in a way that meant she would sometimes show up to dinner distracted by a work problem she hadn't mentioned, and he'd have to read it off her face and decide whether to ask or leave it alone. He didn't always choose right. There was a dinner in the 5th week where he asked too directly about something she wasn't ready to talk about, and she went quiet in a way that lasted the better part of an hour, and he sat there feeling like an idiot, trying to read whether to push or back off, getting it wrong twice before finding the right register. "I don't know how to do this," she said, finally, around 10 that night. "I know. I can feel myself doing the thing where I go behind the glass." She said it flatly, acknowledging it. "I know I do it. I don't always know how to stop." "You don't have to stop. I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him. "You've been patient for 3 years." "Yes." "That's not normal." "No," he agreed. "I had reasons." She looked away, out the window of the restaurant, at the street, and he watched her profile and the small, careful motion of her jaw working. "My ex-business partner," she said, not looking at him, "the one who helped me found the company. He knew me well. He used to say I had a 48-hour emotional processing delay, like everything would happen, and I wouldn't feel it for 2 days, and then it would just arrive." "Is that still true?" "Mostly." She looked back. "Which means I'm still processing Friday. It's been 5 weeks since Friday. I process slowly." He didn't say anything. He let it be what it was. She reached across the table and touched his hand, just her fingertips against his knuckles. And it was brief and uncertain and more honest than most of the grand gestures he'd seen in his life. And he turned his hand over slightly so her fingers weren't resting on nothing. They stayed until the restaurant closed. The thing about Eleanor was that she didn't go away. She never went away. She operated at low heat most of the time. Occasional phone calls, pointed questions and conversation. Small, observational comments that were designed to accumulate. Ryan was aware of her the way you're aware of weather. Not always in the forefront, but there, capable of determining the shape of a day. What Eleanor didn't know, what no one outside of Ryan and Victoria knew, was that the situation had already changed. The dinners, the cautious Fridays, the slow accumulation of something real. It was nothing that would have made sense to report on, nothing formal or declared. But it was there, and it was true, and it meant that Eleanor's pressure was landing on ground that had already shifted. The call that moved things happened on a Thursday evening when Ryan was home with Lily, both of them on the couch watching an animated movie she'd seen 11 times, and he'd seen 6 times since she'd decided it was her favorite 3 months ago. His phone buzzed with Victoria's name. He muted the TV. "Give me 5 minutes, Bug." Lily looked at the screen with the patience of a person being very deliberately patient. He went to the kitchen. "Hey." "She knows." Victoria's voice was flat, controlled, the tone she used when she was angry and didn't want to be. "She called me at dinner. She has—" "I don't know who told her, Ryan, but she knows we've been seeing each other." He leaned against the kitchen counter. "What did she say?" She started with the reasonable version, that she was concerned, that she wanted to make sure I'd thought this through, that she worried about the optics for the company. A pause. And then she said, Victoria stopped. "What did she say?" "She said that you're taking advantage of your position, that it's a power imbalance, and I should think carefully about what his motivations are." Her voice was still controlled, but there was something under it. She used those exact words, taking advantage. Ryan was quiet for a moment. In the living room, Lily had apparently decided that muting was sufficient and resumed the movie. "Are you okay?" he said. "I'm angry." "I know. I defended you. I want you to know that. I was very clear." "I believe you." "She's not going to let this go easily." A breath. "She said she had concerns about Lily, about what it means for you to be in a relationship with your employer when you have a daughter who depends on your income. She was framing it as looking out for you, but she was threatening," he said quietly. "Yes." He closed his eyes for a second. This was the version of Eleanor he'd always known was possible. Not the pleasant pressure, but the actual application of what she had and was willing to use. She wasn't wrong that he was vulnerable. His life ran on a single income. Lily's life ran on that income. That was not paranoia. That was math. "I'm not going to disappear," he said. "I know. I need you to know I'm not saying that because I don't understand what she's capable of. I'm saying it because it's what's true." A longer silence on her end. When she spoke again, her voice was different, not the anger, something that had been underneath it. "She offered you money 3 months ago to leave." He went still. "What?" "I found out tonight. She apparently called your direct line before any of this." A pause. "She told me. I think she was expecting me to be grateful that she tried, or to use it as evidence of how far she was willing to go." Victoria's voice had gone quiet and careful. "Is that why you never told me about it?" "She called me as your mother," he said. "Not as anything actionable. I handled it, and I didn't want it to—" He stopped. "I didn't want to put you in the middle." "I was already in the middle." "I know. I made a call, and I'd probably make the same call again." He paused. "Are you angry at me for it?" A long moment. "I'm processing." 48-hour delay. Something shifted in her voice, not quite a laugh. Something like that. Then, "I'm not going to let her do this." "Victoria, I mean it. I'm 30 years old. I run a company. She doesn't get to manage my life." "I know, but we should be careful how we—" "I know how to be careful. I've been careful my whole life." Her voice was steady again, but with an edge that was new, or not new, just more visible. "I'm tired of being careful about the things that matter." He stood in his kitchen with the refrigerator hum and the muted movie in the next room and the weight of what she'd just said settling down around him. "Okay," he said. "Okay? Tell me what you're thinking." She told him. He listened. In the living room, Lily watched her movie, and outside the apartment the city went about its business, and Ryan stood in the kitchen and understood that the careful, slow thing they'd been building was about to be tested in ways they hadn't gotten around to yet. He was scared. He wouldn't have said so out loud, but he was. Not for himself exactly, for Lily, for the ground under their lives, for the thing between him and Victoria that was still young enough to break. He'd been building it carefully precisely because he knew how much it could cost if it broke. But he was also, underneath the fear, something else, steadier than he'd felt in a long time. Like a decision had been made in his chest without his full participation, and the decision was, this is worth it. She is worth it. He didn't say any of that to her on the phone. He just said, I'm with you. And she said, I know. Eleanor Hale did not make her move immediately, which was almost worse than if she had. The week after the phone call was quiet in the way that precedes things rather than follows them. Ryan went to work, managed the schedule, handled the vendor negotiations, sat in 3 back-to-back meetings on Tuesday about a product rollout that was running 6 weeks behind. Victoria ran the company the way she always did, with precision and visible effort and the particular intensity she brought to problems she could actually solve. They were professional and appropriate and careful. And anyone watching would have seen 2 colleagues doing their jobs. What anyone watching would not have seen, the text at 10:47 Tuesday night. She's been quiet. That worries me more than the call. And Ryan's reply, I know. Let me know if anything changes. The way Victoria's eyes stayed on her phone for a half second when she passed his desk on Wednesday morning before she caught herself. The conversation they had Thursday at the end of the day, door mostly closed, voices low, about what Eleanor might be planning and what they could do about it, and the honest answer, which was, not much, except stay steady. Staying steady was the part Ryan was good at. He'd been doing it for years with less to hold on to. The call from Eleanor came on a Friday afternoon, not to Ryan this time, but to Marcus Webb, the head of Hale Technologies' board of directors. Ryan found out from Victoria at 6 that evening when she called him from her car with the specific flat quality in her voice that meant she was managing something she didn't want to be managing. She called Marcus, Victoria said, this morning. She told him she had concerns about the company's leadership stability, that a relationship between the CEO and a direct report represented a liability issue. A pause. She used the phrase compromised judgment. Ryan let that land. What did Marcus say? He said he'd heard some things and that he'd hoped to speak with me directly before forming an opinion, which means he already had an opinion. She exhaled. He's not hostile, but he's cautious. And cautious with Marcus means he's already thinking about governance protocols and what his fiduciary responsibility looks like. Does he know the specifics of how long, the details? I don't think so. Not yet. She was quiet for a moment. She's building a file, Ryan. She's doing it methodically. The call to Marcus isn't the whole play, it's the opening. He was sitting at his kitchen table. Lily was at her friend Mia's for the evening, and the apartment was very quiet, and he was aware of how much space there was in the quiet for the particular kind of fear he was trying not to give too much room to. What do you want to do? He said. I want to be in front of it. I don't want to be reacting. Her voice steadied. I'm going to call Marcus back tonight and ask for a meeting Monday. Not defensive, just direct. This is the situation. This is why it doesn't represent what she's saying. It represents, here's the plan. Good. I need you to be honest with me about something. Always. If this gets worse, if it becomes an actual board-level thing, it's going to land on you. Whatever they're deciding about me, the scrutiny is going to fall on you harder. You're the one who can be characterized as acting below the waterline, taking advantage of access. She said it plainly, not cruelly, because she wasn't a cruel person and because they'd agreed to be honest. I need to know that you've thought about that, about Lily, about your career, about what a prolonged version of this looks like for you. He was quiet for long enough that she said his name. I've thought about it, he said. And I'm still here. He looked at the kitchen table, at the permission slip for Lily's school trip to the science museum that was under the same magnet, newly signed this time. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't scare me. It does. But scared and unwilling are different things. She didn't say anything for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was less controlled than usual, with something that wasn't quite steadiness but was reaching for it. Okay, she said. Tell me how the Marcus meeting goes. I will. He stayed at the kitchen table after they hung up, with the quiet and the permission slip and the lamp making a yellow circle on the table surface. And he thought about the structure of the thing they'd built together over 3 years and whether it could hold the weight that was coming. And the honest answer was, he didn't know. Some things held and some things didn't, and you didn't always get to know in advance which kind you were dealing with. What he knew was that he'd made a decision, and it was real, and he wasn't going to unmake it because it was getting difficult. If he started unmaking real decisions when they got difficult, he wasn't sure what kind of person that left him being. He went to bed. He slept badly. In the morning, he made coffee and read the news and drove to pick up Lily, who came out of Mia's house with paint in her hair and a paper bag of overnight things, and the expression of someone who had just experienced several important things and needed to report on all of them immediately. "We stayed up until midnight," she said. "You were supposed to be asleep at 9. "We were almost asleep." "That's not the same thing." She got in the car with the focused certainty of someone who considered this conversation concluded. He let it go. She started telling him about the movie they'd watched, and the pizza they'd made, and the way Mia's dog Biscuit had stolen one of her socks while she was sleeping, and he drove them home through the Saturday morning streets and listened to all of it, and the fear from the night before was still there, but it was behind the real thing, which was his daughter in the passenger seat with paint in her hair, and that was the right order for those things to be in. The Marcus meeting happened Monday. Ryan wasn't in it. He was in his office, managing the schedule, handling the logistics of a day that required the same work it always required. And he didn't ask Victoria for a report the way he might have wanted to, because they had agreed to keep the work separate, and he was going to hold to that even when it was uncomfortable. She came by his desk at 4:15. She sat down. She looked tired. "It went okay," she said. "Okay? Or actually okay?" "Both, mostly." Marcus listened. He asked good questions. I was straight with him. The relationship is real. It's not new in the sense that we've known each other for 3 years. There's no situation where I'm being influenced in any direction that doesn't serve the company. She turned her phone over in her hands. He said he appreciated me coming to him directly. He said he'd need to bring it to the full board as a disclosure matter, which I expected. Timeline? 4 weeks. They'll want a formal statement, probably a governance review of reporting structure. Ryan nodded. So I'd need to not be a direct report. That's likely, yes. She looked at him carefully. How do you feel about that? It's reasonable, he said. It's actually the right call governance-wise. The reporting structure should change if the relationship is real. He paused. What does that look like in practice? I've been thinking about it. There's a senior operations director position that's been open for 2 months. It would be a lateral move in terms of title, but a bigger scope of responsibility, reports to the COO rather than directly to me. She met his eyes. I want to be clear, this isn't a demotion. The scope is larger, it's just arm's length, he said. Yes. He sat with that. The job he had, the one he'd done for 3 years, that he'd built from a functional role into something close to indispensable, would need to become something else. Different structure, different reporting line, different daily reality. Can I have a few days to think about it? He said. Of course. Not because I'm uncertain about... He stopped. I know, she said. Take the time. He took 2 days. He read the operations director description carefully. He ran the numbers on compensation, scope, what the actual daily work would look like, how it sat relative to his skills, and what it would build toward. He thought about Lily's school fees and the lease renewal coming in March, and the retirement account he'd been contributing to, and what stability actually meant, concretely, for the two of them. On Wednesday evening, he told Victoria he'd take the role, subject to a formal review and an appropriate transition period. She said, "Good." He said, I need the governance review on record. I don't want there to be any ambiguity about what the board knew and when. Agreed. I'll make sure it's fully documented. And the transition should be real. I'll actually train whoever takes the EA function, not just hand over files. I'd expect nothing less. He looked at her across her desk. I want this to work, he said. All of it. I'm trying to set it up so it can. She looked back at him with the direct look, the one past the composure. So am I, she said. The weeks that followed were not quiet. The announcement of the governance review, framed neutrally, disclosed properly, handled the way a company with good compliance practices would handle it, still moved through the organization the way these things do, which is faster and with more distortion than anyone intends. Ryan felt it in small ways first. A conversation that stopped when he walked into a room, which might have been nothing. An email CC'd one layer above what was necessary, which might have been administrative. A colleague named Patterson from the finance team who had always been friendly and was now slightly formal, careful in a way he hadn't been before. None of it was hostile. Most of it probably wasn't even intentional. But it was there. The atmospheric pressure change that happened when people were trying to figure out what a situation meant for them and for the structure around them. He handled it the way he handled most things that couldn't be directly addressed. He worked. He did the job, the same quality, the same attention, the same reliability. He understood intuitively that the argument he was making was not one he could make in words. It was one he had to make in aggregate, day by day, over time. He'd built trust at this company by being someone you could count on, and the way to defend that reputation was to continue being someone you could count on, especially when it was harder. What he hadn't fully accounted for was Lily. Not that she caused a problem, she didn't, but she noticed things with the radar of a child whose parent had always been somewhat distracted by invisible pressures. And one evening in late October, she looked up from her homework and said, without preamble, "Is everything okay with your work?" He was making dinner. He turned from the stove. "What makes you ask?" She shrugged in the way that meant it wasn't a shrug. It was a real answer she was deciding how to give. "You come home and you're here, but you're kind of somewhere else." He turned the heat down under the pan. He came and sat at the kitchen table across from her. "There's some complicated stuff at work," he said. "Not bad, just a lot of pieces moving." "Is your job okay?" "My job is fine." She looked at him with her assessment face. "Is it about your friend, the boss one?" He was quiet for a beat. "Why would it be about her?" Lily gave him the look that 6 going-on 7-year-olds give adults when adults are being deliberately slow. "Because you talk about her more than you talk about anyone at work." Ryan looked at his daughter. The homework on the table was a worksheet about animal habitats with small drawings in the margins because Lily never did homework without also doing art. "It's a little bit about her," he said. "Are you fighting?" "No. It's just when things change, there's an adjustment period. That's all." She thought about this. "Like when I moved classes and I didn't like my new teacher and then I did?" "Something like that." "Yeah." She accepted this with the practicality of someone who had first-hand experience of adjustment periods. "Okay," she said. Then, "Dad, the broccoli is burning." It wasn't burning. It was slightly overdone. He salvaged it and served it, and Lily ate it without complaint, which was notable because she had feelings about broccoli under ideal conditions. After she was in bed, he stood in the kitchen and thought about what she'd said, "You're kind of somewhere else," and recognized the accuracy of it. He had been giving Lily his presence without his full attention, and she had noticed, and he needed to fix that, not because she'd called him out, but because she was right, and it mattered. He was not going to be someone who let the complications of his adult life bleed into the place his daughter lived. That was a line he'd held for years, and it was still a line. The thing that broke the relative equilibrium open came not from the board review, but from outside the company. And Ryan didn't see it coming because the direction was one he hadn't been watching. A financial news site ran an item in early November. Not a major story, 3 paragraphs buried in a roundup of tech industry updates, but specific enough to be clearly sourced. It described accurately the relationship between Hale Technologies' CEO and a senior employee, mentioned the ongoing governance review, and included a quote from an unnamed source close to the company's founding family describing concerns about judgment and stability at the leadership level. Close to the company's founding family was Eleanor. Ryan knew it immediately. Victoria knew it immediately. Even Marcus Webb, who called Victoria within an hour of the piece going live, probably knew it, though he was too careful to say so. The 3 paragraphs became 6 by evening as other outlets picked it up. By the next morning, it was in the business section of 2 national papers, with the frame that business journalists loved. Romantic entanglement raises questions about governance at fast-growing tech firm. There was a photograph of Victoria from a conference and a separate photo of Ryan from the company directory, and seeing his face in a news article for the first time in his life produced a specific cold feeling in his stomach. He went to work that morning the same way he went every morning, because there was no version of this where he didn't show up. The office was different the moment he walked in. Not hostile. Hale Technologies had a culture that was too professional for open gossip, most of it, but charged, aware, the kind of attention that moves through a room without ever quite coalescing into a direct look. He nodded to the people he passed and went to his desk and opened his email and found 47 unread messages, which was about 30 more than a usual morning. He started at the top and worked down. He was on the 14th email when Victoria appeared at his desk. She looked like she'd been awake for most of the night. Her hair was up and her jacket was straight and her face was completely composed, but her eyes were tired in a way that careful composure couldn't entirely cover. "How are you doing?" she said. "I'm okay." "Ryan?" "I was surprised by the photo," he said honestly. "That part was unexpected." She sat down. She looked at her hands for a moment, then at him. "I know who the source was." "I know too. I called her this morning." He waited. "She said she was trying to protect me. She actually—" Victoria stopped. Her jaw did the set thing, the controlled anger he knew well. She said the story was going to come out anyway, that it was better to control the narrative, and that if I was going to make this mistake, she at least wanted to make sure I was doing it with my eyes open. "Protecting you," he said. "That's what she believes. I've stopped trying to argue with the belief. The belief isn't the problem. The method is." She looked at him. "I told her she had two choices. She could step back from this entirely and let us handle it, or she could watch what happened when I stopped protecting her from the board's reaction to finding out the source of the leak." "How did she take that?" "Badly, and then more carefully." Victoria leaned back slightly. "She'll stand down, for now." He nodded. "There's going to be a board call this afternoon," she said. "Emergency session. Marcus set it up an hour ago. Do you want me there?" She thought about it. "No. I need to handle this one as CEO, not as—" She paused on the word. "I'll tell you everything after." "Okay." She stood. She straightened her jacket, which was already straight. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm sorry you're in this. I know you didn't sign up for your face in a news story." "I signed up for you," he said, and then felt slightly exposed by how direct that was, and held her gaze anyway. Something passed over her face, quick and real. "Yeah," she said. Then she walked toward her office, and the day resumed. Time. The board call lasted 2.5 hours. Ryan sat at his desk and worked through the afternoon and did not think too hard about what was happening in the conference room 3 floors up. He finalized the Singapore logistics report. He coordinated with the IT team on a rollout timeline. He answered the emails he could answer and flagged the ones he couldn't, and did the work the way he always did the work. At 5:30 his phone buzzed. "Call done. Office. Now." He took the elevator up. Victoria was standing at her window when he came in, which was unusual. She typically sat when she was processing, stood when she was ready to move. She turned when he closed the door. "2 board members want me to place the relationship on hold during the review period," she said. "Not terminate it. On hold. 90 days. He absorbed that. "What did you say?" "I told them I'd consider it." She watched his face. "I wanted to tell you before I responded formally. That's what they want, or that's what Marcus is recommending?" "Marcus is staying neutral. Henderson and Chow are the ones pushing it. Both of them are older. Both of them have had governance issues on previous boards. Both of them are correctly reading that this is the optics risk that could define how the story gets told." He sat down in the chair across from her desk, which he almost never did without being invited. She didn't comment on it. "They're not wrong about the risk," he said. "I know. The story right now is CEO in relationship with employee board reviewing. If we follow their recommendation, the story becomes company handles it professionally, governance process works as designed, review concludes cleanly." "Yes." She was watching him carefully. "Is that what you think we should do?" He thought about Lily. He thought about the operations director role that was still in transition. He thought about the 47 emails that morning and his face in the news and the cold feeling in his stomach that had taken most of the day to dissipate. And he thought about the conversation in the parking lot by the lake 2 months ago and what it had taken to get there and what "I'm still here" had meant when he'd said it. "What do you want to do?" he said. She came away from the window and sat across from him, leaning forward with her elbows on the desk in a posture she'd have never used in a formal meeting. "I want to tell them no," she said. "I want to tell them that the governance process is the appropriate mechanism, that the review will conclude in 2 weeks, and that asking me to manage my personal life on their timeline is outside the scope of their authority." "That's the right position," he said, but it accelerates this. If you push back on Henderson and Chow, they're going to escalate. They'll bring in outside governance counsel. The review that was supposed to be 2 weeks becomes 2 months. Yes. That's 2 more months of this, he said. For both of us. For the company. He looked at her. "I can do 2 months. I want to be clear that I can. But I want you to be making the decision with the actual information, not the version where you're protecting me from the math." She was quiet for a moment. "You keep doing that," she said. "What?" "Giving me the information I need to leave, making sure I see the costs clearly." There was something in her voice that wasn't quite irritation, more like its sibling. "You've been doing it since the parking lot." He didn't say anything. "I'm not going to leave," she said. "I need you to stop building me a door." He looked at her. The evening light was doing something specific to the office, turning the walls a darker shade, making the city outside the window into a thing of light and distance. "It's not a door," he said. "It's just information." "Ryan, I'm careful. It's what I do. I'm careful about things that matter." She held his gaze for a long moment, and something in the careful composure shifted. And what was underneath it wasn't anger or exhaustion or the weight of the day. It was something quieter than that, something that had been there in small pieces for months, and was now in a large piece, filling the room. "I know you're careful," she said. "I know why you're careful. I know what you have to lose and why it's always in your calculation." She paused. "I'm asking you to believe that I'm also in the calculation, that I'm not an abstract risk you're managing, that I have considered the thing between us with the same attention I give to anything that matters to me." She stopped. "Which is considerable. The attention I give to things that matter." He sat with that. "Tell Henderson and Chow no," he said. She blinked. "You're right that it's outside the scope of their authority, and I'm not going to be the reason you compromise on a position you're right about." He held her gaze. "We handle the 2 months. We do it the right way. And then it's done." She looked at him for a long time. The light kept changing. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They sat there for a moment in the quiet of the office, the city pressing up against the glass outside, both of them aware of the specific nature of what had just been decided and what it would cost to hold it. Then Victoria straightened up and picked up her phone and started drafting the response to Marcus, and Ryan sat across from her desk and thought about what his daughter had said about adjustment periods, like when I moved classes, and about how she'd been right, as she frequently was, about the shape of things. He didn't go straight home. He drove for a while the way he had the night of the fundraiser gala, no particular destination, needing the motion. At some point, he found himself parked near the water again, not the same lot, but close, the lake flat and dark in the November evening. He sat in the car with the engine off and the cold coming in through the seals and thought about the conversation in Victoria's office. The way she'd said, "I'm not going to leave and stop building me a door," and the thing underneath the composure, which he was learning to read. The truth was, he'd spent so long managing the distance between what he felt and what he allowed to be visible that the management had become its own habit, protective and limiting in equal measure. He'd built the door himself. He'd built it every time he handed her the full cost and made sure she could see the exit and held the space open for her to use it. That wasn't just caution. It was something else. The part of him that had been alone long enough to believe that staying required an offer of escape, that someone choosing to remain needed the option constantly renewed. That was not fair to either of them. He understood this in the abstract. Understanding it in practice, Actually putting down the architecture, trusting the ground without constantly testing it, was a different kind of work. But it was the work. He recognized it as clearly as he recognized any other problem he'd been handed. He started the car. He drove home. He got Lily from the sitter, who reported that she'd been excellent and had helped make dinner and had only asked about the dog 3 times. He carried Lily's overnight bag up the stairs, and she walked beside him half asleep, leaning into his side at the intervals where the stairs leveled. He put her to bed. He stood in the doorway and looked at her room, the drawings on the wall, the small chaos of a child's life, the sleeping shape of his daughter who had 4 different blues in her sky mural and strong opinions about orange juice. The fear was still there. It was probably always going to be there in some form. This was the life he lived, where the stakes were real and the person who depended on him was asleep 8 feet away. But fear and certainty could be in the same room at the same time. He'd learned that a long time ago, in the kitchen of a different apartment, reading a note on a table while holding a 4-month-old, choosing to stay present for the thing that needed him. He pulled the door almost closed. He went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and texted Victoria. How did they take it? Her response came after a few minutes. Henderson said he'd need to consult with outside counsel. Chow said nothing. Marcus thanked me for my clarity. Good, he typed. Are you home? Just got back. How's Lily? Asleep. She helped make dinner, apparently. Of course she did. A pause. Then, Ryan? Yeah, thank you. For today. He looked at that for a moment, and then he typed back, You don't have to thank me. And she sent back, I know. I wanted to. He put his phone down and stood in the kitchen with the lamp making its yellow circle and the city outside doing its relentless city thing. And he thought that this was what it looked like. Not smooth, not arranged, not easy. Just 2 people choosing the same direction, day after day, in the middle of everything that was trying to push them apart. It was enough. It was more than enough. He turned off the lamp and went to bed. The governance review concluded on a Thursday, 3 days ahead of the projected timeline, which Ryan learned from a calendar update rather than from Victoria directly. She was in back-to-back sessions most of the day, and he was 2 floors down doing the work of the operations director role he'd been settling into for the past 6 weeks. The role was different from what he'd done before in ways that were sometimes uncomfortable and mostly good. Broader scope meant more variables, more stakeholders, more situations where the answer wasn't immediately obvious and he had to build toward it. He'd spent the first 2 weeks making himself familiar with processes he'd previously only observed from the outside. Supply chain coordination, vendor contract cycles, the logistics infrastructure that kept a technology company of this size actually functioning as opposed to just appearing to function. There was more to it than he'd anticipated, which was the good kind of more. What he missed, and wouldn't have admitted to most people, was the particular efficiency of working directly beside Victoria. 3 years of calibrated proximity, learning her rhythm, anticipating the shape of a problem before she fully articulated it, being the person who caught things before they fell, had made them a functional unit in ways that were only visible now that the structure had changed. Her new EA was competent and professional and was learning fast, and none of that was the point. The point was that Ryan was now 2 floors away, and the distance was necessary and correct and still a thing he was adjusting to. He got the formal review summary at 4:48 p.m. via secure document link, marked for his attention alongside Victoria's and Marcus Webb's. He read it at his desk with his door closed. The language was what legal and governance documents always were, careful, layered, designed to say things without saying them in ways that could be used against anyone. But the substance was clear. The relationship had been disclosed appropriately. The reporting structure change addressed the direct conflict of interest. Ryan's transition to the operations director role was noted as a proactive remediation step. The board's conclusion was that no further action was required, subject to the standard annual review and an ongoing requirement for disclosure of any material changes to the relationship. He read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. It was over. The formal part, anyway. He texted Victoria, "Read the summary." She replied 6 minutes later, which meant she was between sessions. "And? Clean," he wrote. "You handled it right. We handled it right." He looked at that for a moment, and then he put his phone face down on the desk and went back to the vendor contract he'd been reviewing, and the afternoon continued. What he hadn't fully anticipated was how the aftermath of a thing like this sat in the body. Not dramatically, not the way a crisis sits, which is acute and consuming, but the way prolonged stress sits when it finally releases, which is heavy and disorienting and surprisingly close to exhaustion. He noticed it that weekend, driving Lily to soccer practice, when she asked him something from the back seat, and he had to ask her to repeat it because the first time had passed through him without registering. I said, "Can we get hot chocolate after?" she said, with the patience of someone who had asked a thing twice. "Yeah, sure." She studied him in the rear view. "You look tired." "I'm fine." "You say that and then you're tired anyway." He looked at her reflection. "When did you get this observant?" "I've always been observant. You're just not always paying attention." He couldn't argue with that. He got her to practice and sat on the bleachers with a mediocre coffee from the vending machine and watched her chase the ball with 11 other children who were all playing slightly different games on the same field, and he let the week drain out of him in the cold November air. He thought about the review summary. He thought about Henderson and Chow and the 2 months of pressure and the governance process that had done what it was supposed to do, imperfectly and slowly and with considerable collateral strain. He thought about Eleanor, who had gone quiet after Victoria's ultimatum, but not gone anywhere, who was presumably processing this development in whatever way Eleanor processed things. He thought about Victoria and about the conversation in her office, where she'd told him to stop building her a door, and about what he'd understood in the car by the lake afterward. He was still building it, not consciously, not in the obvious ways, but in the small, habitual ways. The careful hedging, the constant accounting for the cost. The posture of someone who expected to be accommodated rather than wanted. He was aware of it the way you're aware of a habit once someone names it. Awareness was not the same as being finished with it, but it was the start of something. Lily scored a goal, which she was doing in the wrong net because she'd lost track of which direction her team was playing in, and the opposing coach started laughing before he could catch himself, and Lily looked at the ball in the net with pure satisfaction until her teammate Maya ran over to explain the situation. He watched her absorb the information, look at the correct net, and then shrug with complete equanimity and run back into the game. He thought, "That is a better approach than the one you've been using." The first time he had dinner with Victoria after the review concluded felt different from the dinners before. Not better exactly, or not only better. More like the air pressure in the room had equalized. The thing they'd been doing under scrutiny, the having to prove it, the explaining themselves to structures that had a legitimate claim on their attention but were still fundamentally external, that was done. What was left was just the two of them, which had always been what it was about. They went to the Thai place again. The same small table, same single candle. Victoria had come directly from the office and she still had her work jacket on, and she'd taken her hair down somewhere between the building and the restaurant, which he'd learned was her specific decompression signal. "How's the operations role?" she asked. "Bigger than I thought, in good ways." He turned his menu over without opening it, because they always got the same things. "The Singapore coordination was a mess when I inherited it. I've been untangling it for 3 weeks." "I know, I've seen the updates." She looked at him. "You're good at it." "I'm getting there." "No, you're good at it now. The Singapore thing alone, you caught a vendor overlap that was costing us about $200,000 a quarter." "I noticed things," he said, "and it came out the same way it had at the career fair 3 years ago. And she caught it, and something in her face did the thing he'd been watching for 3 years and was only now allowing himself to really look at. "You did," she said. They ate. They talked about the things they talked about. The company, Lily, a book she'd been reading, something Lily had said about a school project that had made him actually laugh out loud when it happened. The conversation moved the way it always moved, easily and without the need to manage it, and he sat across from her and thought about 3 years of this exact thing. The ease of it, the specific way her attention sat on him, the way the rest of the room receded, and felt something that was close to gratitude and more complicated than gratitude. "I want to say something," he said, around the time their plates were being cleared. She looked at him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the door." He picked up his water glass and set it down again because he needed to do something with his hands. You were right. I've been building it. I'm aware of why I built it, and I'm not apologizing for the instinct, but I see it now. In the way I give you the cost before you ask for it. In the way I make sure you can always see the exit. She was watching him carefully. I don't want to keep doing it, he said. I want to assume you're here because you're choosing to be here, and keep choosing that, without me reminding you that you have other options. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Okay. For what it's worth, she said, I have my own version of the same problem. The glass thing. The glass thing. She looked at her hands. When things feel uncertain, I go behind it, and sometimes I can't find the way back out. I know I did it twice in the last month. The dinner where you asked about my mother and I went quiet for an hour. She paused. I'm aware of it. I'm not promising I won't do it again, but I'm aware. I know. We're not good at this, she said, and it came out with a kind of honesty that cost her something. He could hear it. No, he agreed. But we're both trying. Yeah. He looked at her. That's the part that matters. She held his gaze for a moment with something that wasn't quite a smile but was related to one, and then she reached across the table and put her hand over his the way she'd done that night 2 months ago, the uncertain gesture that was more honest than confidence, and this time neither of them treated it like a brief thing. They walked out of the restaurant, and she took his arm on the sidewalk, not dramatically, just naturally, the way you take the arm of someone you're with, and he was aware of the simple, factual reality of it. This was a thing he was allowed to have, and it was real, and it was his. Eleanor Hale's next move came in December, and it was not what Ryan had expected. He'd been anticipating something formal, another board contact, another carefully sourced story, some mobilization of the resources she had and was willing to use. What came instead was a phone call to Victoria on a Tuesday evening, and Victoria called Ryan afterward with a tone he hadn't heard from her before, which was cautious and slightly off balance. She wants to have dinner, Victoria said. The three of us. Ryan took a moment with that. All three. She said she's been thinking about things, that she wants to understand. A pause. I don't know if I believe that, but I can't read her on this one. She didn't sound like she was strategizing. She sounded tired. When? Saturday, her house. She'll cook. He turned that over. Eleanor cooking was not nothing. It was her version of a concession, a gesture of domestic peace that she used when she wanted to signal something without having to say it directly. What do you want to do? He said. I want to go. Victoria said it with a careful steadiness, like she'd already worked through the alternatives. I want to give her the chance to be different about this. She's my mother. I don't want to be at war with her forever. Then we go. A pause on her end. You're not going to tell me to consider the optics or think about whether it's wise? No. Why not? Because you already thought about all of that, he said, and you want to go anyway, and because she's your mother. A longer pause. Okay. For the record, he said, I'm nervous. She almost laughed. So am I. He spent part of Friday evening working out what to say, and then abandoned that plan because the kind of thing Eleanor was going to assess couldn't be prepared for. She was going to watch him with Lily's mother gone and ask herself a question she'd been asking since she found out about him, which was, what is the actual life this man has built, and what does it mean for my daughter? The only answer was the true one. He told Lily on Saturday morning, carefully, that they were having dinner with a woman named Eleanor, who was the mother of the friend from work she'd heard about. Lily looked up from her breakfast. The boss friend? Yes. She considered this for a moment with the gravity she brought to social situations. Is she nice? She's complicated. Like how? She loves her daughter a lot, and sometimes that comes out as being controlling, but she means well. Lily absorbed this with the practical wisdom of someone who had navigated the social ecosystems of first grade. Like how Mia's mom wouldn't let Mia have a sleepover until she cleaned her room, even though Mia said it wasn't that bad. Something like that, yeah. Okay, Lily said, and went back to her breakfast. Eleanor Hale's house was in a quiet suburb north of the city, a large colonial with a driveway that had been cleared of leaves with a thoroughness that suggested either staff or compulsion. Ryan parked and got Lily out of the back seat, and she stood beside him on the driveway looking at the house with evaluative eyes. "It's very big," she said. "It is. Do you think there's a dog?" "I don't know." "If there's a dog, it's going to be a good night," she said, with the confidence of someone who had established a personal metric. There was not a dog. There was Eleanor. She opened the door before they knocked, which meant she'd been watching the driveway, which meant she was nervous too, which Ryan filed away as information. She was smaller than she seemed on the phone. His impression of her had always been large because of the space she took up in conversation. But in person, she was a compact woman in her early 60s with Victoria's bone structure and the careful, assessing eyes of someone who'd spent decades reading rooms. She looked at Ryan. She looked at Lily. Lily looked back at her with the direct, fearless gaze of a child who had not yet learned to be intimidated by people in nice houses. "I'm Lily," she said. Eleanor blinked. "Hello, Lily. Do you have a dog?" No, I'm afraid not." Lily accepted this with visible but restrained disappointment. "That's okay. Some people don't." Something moved across Eleanor's face that might have been the beginning of something she hadn't expected to feel. She stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. Victoria was already inside, and she came down the hallway when she heard them, and Ryan watched the brief, complicated thing that happened in the space between her and her mother. Acknowledgement, unresolved tension, the particular fatigue of a long-standing argument that both parties are tired of having. Then Victoria looked at him, and something settled. Dinner was a roast chicken with vegetables, which Eleanor had clearly put time into, and they sat at a dining table that was sized for 6, with the 4 of them at one end, which created a slight intimacy that Ryan thought was probably intentional. Lily was the variable no one had planned for, which was usually the case with Lily. She asked Eleanor whether the wallpaper in the hallway was real flowers or painted flowers, and then examined it carefully when Eleanor said painted to verify the answer. She asked whether the chicken was from a farm or from a store. She told a story about the mural she'd done at school that required no prompting and lasted several minutes and included a detailed defense of her decision to use 4 different blues. She ate without complaint, which was her best version of herself at a dinner table. Eleanor watched her with the same careful assessment she'd been using on Ryan, but with something added, a quality of attention that had no strategy in it, pure attention. Midway through the meal, in a pause between Lily's reporting on the state of her class's hamster habitat project, Eleanor looked at Ryan. "She's remarkable," she said, and it wasn't to Lily, it was to him, and it was not a weapon or an approach, it was a statement. "She is," he said. "How long has she—" Eleanor stopped. "Her mother isn't in the picture." "No," kept his voice even. "She left when Lily was 4 months old. It's been the 2 of us since." Eleanor looked at Lily, who had gone back to her chicken. Then she looked at Ryan again, and he let her look. Because this was the assessment, and there was no point in anything but letting it happen. "That's a long time to do something alone," Eleanor said. "Yes." And still, she stopped again. "I mean to say that it shows how you've done it." It was not an apology. It was not a concession. It was something that existed in the space before those things. Recognition, maybe. The first movement of it. He nodded once. "Thank you," he said. Victoria was watching her mother with an expression he'd never quite seen on her face, surprised and careful and hopeful in a way she'd never have permitted herself to perform. After dinner, Lily asked if she could look at the garden, which was dark and therefore slightly mysterious, and Eleanor took her out onto the back porch with a flashlight, while Ryan and Victoria sat at the dining table listening to Lily's voice carry through the glass door as she asked questions about the plants. "She's doing it," Victoria said quietly. "What?" "Looking." She nodded toward the window, where they could see Eleanor crouching down to show Lily something in a pot near the porch railing. "She looks at things she's uncertain about. She examined you through Lily because she couldn't look at you directly yet." Ryan watched through the glass. Eleanor was explaining something about the plant, and Lily was listening with the focused interest she brought to anything that someone was willing to explain properly. "She's trying," he said. "Yes?" "That's enough for tonight." Victoria looked at him. You're very patient with her. She loves you, he said simply. That's a fact that doesn't require me to be at war with her. Something moved in Victoria's expression. She looked at the table, then back at him. I don't deserve you, she said, and it came out almost before she could catch it, the kind of thing that slips out when someone stops managing what they're saying. Don't do that, he said. Don't add up the accounting and decide what you deserve. It's not a transaction. He held her gaze. I'm here because I want to be here. That's all the math there is. She was quiet for a moment, and then she exhaled, something releasing that she'd been holding. She put her hand on the table between them, not reaching, just there, and he put his hand over it. Through the glass, Lily was apparently making a case for something, gesturing with both hands in the way she did when she was building an argument, and Eleanor was listening to her with the full attention of someone who has been surprised into genuine engagement. The month of December passed differently than any December Ryan could remember. Not easier. The operations role was demanding, and the holiday season added its own particular pressures to a company that size. And Lily had a school performance where she was playing the third wise man and had opinions about the costume that required several conversations with her teacher. But different in the way of a thing that has settled into its real shape after a period of being indeterminate. He and Victoria found their rhythm outside the office. It was never smooth in the way that things are smooth in the stories people tell afterward, when the friction has been edited down to a single representative scene. It was a real rhythm, which meant it had irregularities. The evening she canceled twice in a row because of a product crisis, both times with genuine reason and inadequate notice, and the subsequent conversation that required more honesty than was comfortable. The Sunday he showed up to her apartment for brunch, and was in a mood he couldn't fully account for, and wasn't able to get past for most of the morning, and she sat with it without asking him to explain it away. The argument about something so logistical, it was almost absurd, whether they were handling the company's holiday party appropriately from an optics standpoint. That was really about whether they were allowed to make decisions as a couple that also had professional stakes, which was a question with no clean answer and which they reached a working accommodation on over the course of 3 days. They were figuring it out, in the way that things actually get figured out, which is imperfectly, and with recalibration and without ever quite arriving at a place where you stop needing to pay attention. Eleanor came to the city twice in December. The first time was for a board event that had nothing to do with Ryan, and she and Victoria had dinner alone, and Victoria came home afterward quieter than when she left, but not in the bad way. The second time was a Saturday afternoon, and Victoria asked if Ryan would bring Lily over for coffee, framing it as casual, which it wasn't, which was also fine. Lily spent 45 minutes with Eleanor in the kitchen, learning to make something Eleanor called a proper shortbread, and Ryan and Victoria sat in the living room listening to the conversation in the kitchen with the mutual awareness that something was happening in there that neither of them had arranged and neither of them should interrupt. He could hear Lily asking whether you could use brown sugar instead of white, and Eleanor explaining that you could, but it would change the texture, and Lily saying she liked texture and a pause, and then Eleanor's voice saying, "All right, let's try it." Victoria was looking at her coffee cup. "She's not there yet," Ryan said quietly. "With us. But she's getting somewhere." "I know. That's worth something." Victoria looked up at him. "You make it easier, to be patient with her. I don't know if I'd be finding it as easy without—" She stopped. "I probably would. I don't want to put that on you." "It's not a burden," he said. "I'm not—" He stopped, caught himself. "Stop building the door." "I'm glad I can make it easier," he said instead. "I want to." She looked at him for a moment with the look he'd been learning, past the composure, through the glass she mentioned. Then she reached over and took his hand in both of hers, the same gesture she'd used months ago, but with the uncertainty gone from it, settled into something that was just her choosing to hold it. In the kitchen, Lily was apparently now negotiating for the addition of chocolate chips, and Eleanor was explaining the principles of shortbread in a voice that was trying to be firm and not quite succeeding. The conversation he hadn't expected happened on a Wednesday evening in the third week of December, when he was leaving the office later than planned and ran into Eleanor in the lobby. She was visiting Victoria for dinner, which he'd known about in the abstract way of knowing things that aren't directly on his schedule. She was in a coat and scarf and carrying what looked like food from a market, and they nearly walked into each other coming through the lobby door from opposite directions. They both stopped. "Mr. Carter," she said. "Mrs. Hale." A beat. The lobby was mostly emptied at this hour, the desk staff wrapping up, the security guard at the far end. "Are you heading up?" she said. "No, I was on my way out." Another pause. They stood there in the lobby, which was an absurd place to have whatever this was. "I owe you an apology," Eleanor said, and it came out with the quality of something she'd been carrying and was putting down, carefully but deliberately. "I said things to you early on that were... I characterized your situation and your intentions in ways that were unfair, and I called Marcus, which was... I was trying to protect Victoria. I understand that's not a sufficient explanation." Ryan looked at her. She was meeting his gaze with an effort that was visible and real. "I'm aware of what I put you through," she said. "Both of you. I want you to know I understand it." He nodded slowly. "I know you were trying to protect her. I was. And I know that what I am on paper, the salary difference, the job, the situation with Lily, none of it reads the way she deserves, by the metrics you were using." "I was using the wrong metrics," Eleanor said. He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "You were." She absorbed that without flinching, which he respected. "She's happy," Eleanor said. "I can see it. It's..." She paused, something working in her face. "It's not the happiness I expected for her, but I've been thinking that my expectations were designed around what I needed for my own peace of mind. Not around her." He didn't say anything. It was the most honest thing he'd heard Eleanor say in 3 years of knowing about her, and it deserved space. "I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately," she said. "I'm asking if we can start from a different place." He picked up his bag. He thought about Victoria at 17, maneuvered into dinners she didn't want. He thought about the phone calls, the board contact, his face in the news. He thought about Lily in the kitchen with brown sugar shortbread and Eleanor's voice not quite managing to be firm. "Yeah," he said, "we can do that." Eleanor nodded once, and something in her posture changed, not quite releasing, but adjusting. She walked toward the elevator and he walked toward the door, and that was the end of it for that evening. But it was also the beginning of something else. On the Friday before Christmas, Ryan's sister called from Columbus. He was in the car, just picked Lily up from school, and he put it on speaker because Lily liked talking to Aunt Dana, and Dana said, "So when do we get to meet this woman?" "Dana. Lily told me," Dana said cheerfully. Ryan looked in the rear view at Lily, who was looking out the window with elaborate innocence. "I mentioned it," Lily said without looking at him. "She said you're happy," Dana said. "She said you're kind of weird, but a different kind of weird." "A better weird," Lily corrected. He kept his eyes on the road. He thought about telling his sister it was complicated, or too soon, or that they were still figuring it out. All of those things were true. "I'll see what her schedule looks like in January," he said. Dana said something pleased. Lily went back to her window. He drove them home through the late afternoon city, the streets full of people doing their December things, coats and bags, and the specific hurried quality of a city in the last week before a holiday. He turned on the radio, and Lily recognized a song and started singing along with the wrong words in the confident way she sang all songs, and he turned it up a little. He was not good at this. He had never been particularly good at the version of life where things were working, because he'd built so much of himself in the direction of managing things that weren't. He was going to have to learn it, the same way he'd learned everything else. Imperfectly, with attention, one day at a time. But Lily was in the back seat singing the wrong words to a Christmas song, and the city was going about its business outside the windows. And there was a dinner on Sunday that he was looking forward to without reservation, without calculating the cost, without building anything toward an exit. That was new. That was, he thought, the right direction. He turned the radio up a little more and drove them home. January came in cold and without ceremony, the way Chicago Januaries always did. Not a dramatic arrival, but a simple tightening, the city pulling its coat closed and getting on with it. Ryan had lived here long enough to respect that quality. There was something honest about a place that didn't dress up its difficult seasons. The new year brought with it a specific kind of clarity that the previous months hadn't allowed. The governance review was done. The news cycle had moved on, as news cycles do, to other companies and other complications. The operations role had become genuinely his, not just in the org chart, but in the way he inhabited it, the way the work had shaped itself around his particular way of thinking. Henderson and Chow had both, in their separate ways, made professional peace with the situation, which meant they'd stopped treating the question as open. Marcus Webb had sent Ryan a brief, formal note in the second week of January that said simply, "The Q4 Singapore results were excellent. Well done." For Marcus, that was the equivalent of a standing ovation. What none of this meant was that things were easy. Easy was not a word Ryan associated with his life, and he'd stopped expecting it sometime in the 18 months after Lily was born. What he had was something better than easy, which was workable and real and pointed in the right direction. The board meeting that changed everything was scheduled for the third Thursday of January. It was a standard quarterly session, performance review, forward projections, product roadmap update. Ryan was not in it. He was in a vendor call on the floor below, working through a revised distribution agreement with a logistics partner in Toronto, when his phone lit up with a text from Victoria at 2:17 p.m. The text said, "Henderson just moved to table the CEO performance review pending an independent governance audit." Chow seconded. Ryan asked the Toronto logistics partner to hold for 5 minutes. He stepped into the hallway. He called her. She picked up immediately, which meant she'd stepped out of the meeting too. "What's the framing?" he said. "Cumulative concerns about leadership judgment, the relationship, the review, the November press." He's packaging it as due diligence, but the vote was 4-3 to table. Her voice was controlled in the specific way it got when she was managing something she was furious about. Marcus abstained, which was unexpected. Why would Marcus abstain? "I don't know yet." He looked. "I don't know. I've known Marcus for 6 years and I couldn't read him." Ryan thought fast. "Who are the 4? Henderson, Chow, Patterson," which surprised me, "and Weston." Weston surprised me too. He was already running the math. 11 board members. 4 to table, 3 against, Marcus abstaining, 4 unaccounted for. Reyes, Kim, Ibarra, and Nichols. All 4 said they wanted more information before voting. So the field was technically open. "How long do you have?" Henderson proposed a 60-day audit window. "There's a procedural vote next week to formalize." "Can you delay the procedural vote?" 30 days, maybe. Our bylaws allow the CEO to request additional preparation time before a procedural governance vote. It's meant for regulatory situations, but the language is broad enough. "Use it." He leaned against the hallway wall. "That gives us 30 days to get to Reyes, Kim, Ibarra, and Nichols before Henderson does." A pause. "Not just me," she said. "What?" "I mean that I want you in these conversations. Not as my partner, as the operations director. Your Singapore numbers, the vendor restructuring, the Q4 results, all of it. I want them to see the whole picture, that the relationship and the professional record are the same person, not separate claims." He thought about what that meant. Standing in front of board members who'd been reading about him in the news 2 months ago and making the case in numbers and results, rather than in the personal narrative, which he'd never been comfortable offering anyway. "Okay," he said. "You're sure? If I'm going to be part of this company in a real way, I'm going to defend my place in it. Yes, I'm sure." He could hear her breathe. "I'll set up the calls starting Monday." He went back to the Toronto logistics call. He apologized for the interruption. He finished the contract revision. He was professional and focused and specific, and nobody in that call would have known that the ground under everything had just shifted again. The 30 days were the most concentrated work Ryan had done since the early months of his EA role, when he'd been learning the architecture of a billion-dollar company from the inside while simultaneously learning what Victoria Hale needed and how she thought. This was different. Not learning, but defending, demonstrating, building a case from the raw material of everything he'd actually done. He prepared packets for each board member who hadn't voted. Not presentations in the polished sense. He'd sat through enough board meetings to know that the members he needed to reach were experienced enough to be skeptical of Polish. What they needed was specifics, numbers with context, problems he'd identified and solved in the language of operations and risk and return. The Singapore restructuring, which had taken 6 weeks and identified a $250,000 quarterly loss in vendor overlap. The Toronto logistics renegotiation, which closed at terms 14% better than the previous contract. A supply chain redundancy project he'd initiated in November that had reduced single point of failure risk in 2 of the company's most critical distribution nodes. And the broader cultural work, the team he'd been building in operations, the collaborative processes with the product and engineering divisions, the reputation he was developing inside the company as someone whose judgment could be relied on. He talked to Reyes first. Reyes was 63, a former CFO, and he listened to the operations summary with the focused attention of someone who understood what he was looking at. He asked sharp questions about the Singapore methodology. Ryan answered them directly without hedging. "You noticed a vendor overlap that the previous team had missed for 2 years," Reyes said. "The previous team was managing 70 other priorities. It wasn't negligence, it was capacity. And you had capacity because your role changed." "Yes." Reyes looked at him. "You understand what Henderson's argument is. He's saying the relationship compromised the CEO's judgment in professional decisions, including my transition to this role." And your response? "The transition was recommended by Marcus, formalized through a governance review, and approved by the full board. My performance since has been documented and reviewable. If the argument is that the results are fabricated or inflated, I'd welcome an independent audit of the numbers." He held Reyes's gaze. "If the argument is that a capable person shouldn't have been given a capable person's job, I'm less sure what the response to that is supposed to be." Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll read the full packet." Kim was harder. Kim was 48, technology background, and she came in already skeptical. Not hostile, but with the particular caution of someone who'd seen governance failures and knew how they started. "Walk me through the conflict of interest from your perspective," she said. "Not the board's characterization, yours." He took a breath. "The conflict was real when I was a direct report. The governance review addressed it correctly. The reporting structure changed. What remained was a personal relationship that both parties disclosed and that exists outside of the professional decisions either of us makes." He paused. "The conflict of interest argument only holds if my promotion was unearned, or if Victoria's decisions have been materially affected in a way that harms the company. I'd ask you to look at the Q4 numbers and tell me if the company looks like it's being run by someone with compromised judgment." Kim looked at her copy of the operations summary. "The Toronto contract is impressive. Thank you. How did you get them to the 14%? He told her. In detail. She asked 3 follow-up questions, each more specific than the last, and by the time he was leaving, she had her pen out and was making notes in the margin of the packet. Ibarra and Nichols were a joint call, which they requested, which meant they'd been talking to each other, which was either good or neutral. Ibarra led. "We want to ask you something that isn't in the financial summary," Ibarra said. He was 70, a founder himself, and he had the specific direct quality of people who had spent decades in rooms where the social cost of being indirect was higher than the cost of being blunt. "If the relationship ends, for any reason, what happens to your position here?" Ryan had expected this question because it was the right question. "I'd still do the job," he said. "The job exists because the company needs it. My performance in it is the argument for my being here, and that argument doesn't change based on my personal life. And if it became untenable, professionally, then I'd leave. I'm not going to compromise the company's functioning or Victoria's ability to lead it because I want to protect my own position. That's not the kind of person I am, and it's not the kind of situation I'm going to create." "That's easy to say," Nichols said, not unkindly. "I know. All I can tell you is that I've had opportunities to make the easier choice before. When the first news story ran, when my face was in the paper, when the pressure was significant and the exit was available, and I didn't take them. Not because I'm noble, because the way I've chosen to live requires me to be consistent about what I'll do when things are hard." A silence on the call. Ibarra was looking at something off-screen. The Singapore audit methodology, he said. Who did you use? I built it internally. I can send you the framework if it's useful. Send it, Ibarra said. He sent it. Victoria was running the same track in parallel. Her own conversations with the 4 undecided members. Her own case built on the company's performance, on the governance record, on 6 years of building something that had never once missed a quarterly projection by more than 2%. She was making the CEO's argument, which was different from his, and she was making it in the particular way she made hard arguments, without theater, without appeal to sympathy, with the kind of clarity that comes from someone who has spent years being the most prepared person in every room she walked into. They talked every evening during those 30 days. Not always long, sometimes 15 minutes between her last call of the day and his drive to pick up Lily from the sitters, but consistently, the check-in that had become the structure of their days. She'd report on her conversations. He'd report on his. They'd compare notes on where the votes seemed to be settling. One night, around the 3rd week, Victoria said, "Why are you good at this?" At what? The Reyes conversation. Kim, Ibarra, and Nichols. You went in there and made them see you as a person, not as a situation. A pause. I've watched good executives fail at that. They go in defensive and people read the defensiveness as guilt. He thought about it. I've been being assessed my whole adult life, he said. Job interviews, salary negotiations, the daycare that said there was a 6-month waiting list and then found a spot when I explained what my options were. I've been in rooms where people were deciding whether I was acceptable, and I've learned that the only answer that works is the true one. Defensiveness reads as something to defend. She stopped. That's not a skill you develop in business school. No. You developed it because you had to. Most useful things come that way. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had something in it that wasn't analysis. I need you to know something, she said. What? Whatever happens with the vote, whatever the board decides, I'm not going to let that be the measure of whether this was worth it. The 30 days, the news story, your picture in the paper. None of that is the measure. A pause. You are the measure. Lily is the measure. What we've built is the measure. And by that accounting, I'm not in deficit. He sat in his car in the parking lot of the Sitters building and looked at the winter-dark street and held the phone against his ear and let that land where it was supposed to land. Okay, he said. Okay. I mean, yes. I know. He exhaled. I know that. I'm getting better at knowing it. She almost laughed. Good. Victoria. Yeah. Same, he said. By that accounting, same. A pause, and then she said, Go get Lily. He went and got Lily. The procedural vote happened on a Tuesday. Ryan was in the building in a meeting about a product distribution timeline that was legitimately important and that he was genuinely paying attention to, mostly. Victoria texted at 3:41, 7-4 against Henderson's motion. Marcus voted with us. He read that 3 times. Then he excused himself from the meeting, stepped into the hallway, and called her. 7, he said. Reyes, Kim, Ibarra, Nichols, and Marcus. All 5. She sounded different than she had in weeks. Not relieved exactly, because relief implied the fear had been worse than she let on, which she wouldn't have admitted during the 30 days. But settled, present in a way that the pressure had been preventing. What did Marcus say? He said he'd been thinking about his abstention. He said he'd wanted to see how I handled the 30 days before he decided. A pause. He told me afterward that the thing that moved him was you. Ryan was quiet. He said, and I'm quoting, the man prepared for every conversation like it was the most important meeting of his career, and then showed up like it was just a meeting. He said that's a rare quality. He leaned against the hallway wall. The fluorescent light was slightly too bright, the way office hallways always were. And someone walked past with a coffee cup and a distracted expression and didn't notice him standing there. Henderson, he said, requested a formal statement of the vote to be entered into the board record, which is his right. He'll be difficult for a while. She paused. He's not wrong that there was a legitimate governance question to ask. He was wrong about the answer. And Chow? Chow sent me an email an hour ago. He said the vote was clear and that he looks forward to continuing to work with me, which in Chow's language means he's switching sides. Ryan looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent light hummed. It's over, he said. The board part is over. A brief pause. The rest is just life. Yeah. Are you okay? He thought about that honestly. I don't know what the right word is. Tired, but in the way that feels clean. Come to dinner tonight. I have Lily. Bring her. He paused. They'd kept the dinner arrangement separate from Lily's life, deliberately, because it was early and because Lily's attachment formed fast, and he didn't want to give her something to attach to before he was sure it was stable. But the 30 days were done. The vote was done. The ground was as settled as ground was going to get. She'll ask about a dog, he said. I'll get dog treats. You don't have a dog. I'll get them anyway, in case. He stood in the hallway and thought about his daughter's face in the morning and the permission slip under the magnet and the way things were, right now, in this specific version of his life that he hadn't planned but had built one day at a time from the available materials. 7 o'clock, he said. 7 o'clock. Udd, he told Lily in the car on the way there. Not a formal conversation, just the facts, simply because Lily was 7 and she processed information better when it came without ceremony. We're going to Victoria's for dinner, he said. Lily looked up from the book she was reading in the back seat. The boss friend? She's not technically my boss anymore. But yes. Why not technically? My job changed. I report to someone else now. Lily considered this. So she's just a friend? He thought about what word to use and decided on the honest one. She's someone I'm seeing, like more than a friend. Lily looked at him with her assessment face. He kept his eyes on the road. Like a girlfriend? She said. Like that, yes. A pause. Does she know about me? She does. She's known about you for a long time, since before I knew she was going to be more than a friend. Another pause, longer this time. He could feel her thinking in the back seat. Is she nice? She's good, he said. Like we talked about. Better than nice. Does she want to meet me? Yes. She asked me to bring you. Lily went back to her book for a block, which was her version of processing. Then, okay, she said, with the equanimity of someone who had decided a thing was acceptable and was done deliberating. He found parking 2 blocks from Victoria's building. They walked in the January cold, Lily with her hands in her pockets and her chin tucked down against the wind, and Ryan thought about all the versions of this evening he might have been walking toward if things had broken differently over the past 3 years. And then he stopped thinking about alternate versions because the actual version was the one he was in, and it was the one that mattered. Victoria answered the door herself, which he noted because she had a doorman and an elevator attendant, and any number of people whose function was to manage exactly this kind of thing. She'd answered it herself. She was in a sweater and jeans, hair down, and she looked nervous in a way she almost never looked. Not board meeting nervous, not crisis nervous. The other kind. The kind that meant something personal was at stake. She looked at Ryan, then she looked at Lily. Lily looked back at her with the direct, unadorned assessment that was her default mode of encountering new people. Hi, Lily said. Hi, said Victoria. A beat. My dad says you're good, Lily said. Not just nice, good. Something moved across Victoria's face. I try to be, she said. That's a good answer, Lily said, and walked inside. Ryan looked at Victoria. She looked at him. There was something in her expression that he recognized. It was the look from the parking lot by the lake, the one from the sidewalk outside the restaurant, the one that had been building its way toward the surface for 3 years and was now simply there, unmanaged, taking up the space it needed. She's terrifying, Victoria said. I told you. She stepped back from the door to let him in. Dinner was pasta, which Lily approved of, and a salad, which Lily tolerated, and a bread that Victoria had gotten from a bakery 2 blocks away, specifically because she'd asked Ryan what Lily liked, and Ryan had said she had strong bread opinions, and Victoria had gone to 3 bakeries. He hadn't told Lily about the bakeries. He watched Victoria place the bread on the table and Lily pick it up and examine it and take a bite and say, "This is really good," with genuine, unpoliticized conviction. And he watched Victoria's face in the moment after that, and he thought, there it is. The dinner was not smooth. Lily asked questions that had no social filter, whether Victoria lived alone and wasn't that lonely, whether the apartment cost a lot, whether she was the actual boss of the whole company, or just part of the boss. How come she didn't have any drawings on her fridge? Victoria answered all of them with a straightforwardness that Lily respected, because Lily could detect evasion like a radar and would simply ask the question again from a different angle if she detected it. "I don't have drawings because no one's given me any," Victoria said about the fridge. Lily looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Ryan, then back at Victoria. "I'll make you one," she said. "What do you want it to be?" Victoria blinked. "What are my options?" "Animals are good. Or things. I did a mural at school. I'm good at skies." "A sky then," Victoria said, "with 4 different blues." Lily pointed at her. "See, that's a good answer." After dinner, Lily fell asleep on the couch under a throw blanket while watching an animated movie that she'd requested and then lost the battle with exhaustion about 20 minutes into. Ryan and Victoria sat in the kitchen with tea, the apartment quiet around them, and Lily's breathing the only sound from the living room. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said. "She asks a lot of questions." "No, I mean it. She decides whether she trusts you and then she moves. There's no performance in it." He looked at his tea. "She's always been that way. Even when she was small. She'd meet someone and you could see her just looking, running whatever assessment she ran, and then she'd either lean in or she wouldn't." "She leaned in." "Yeah." He looked at Victoria. "She does that when she trusts my judgment. I haven't given her a reason not to. Yet. I'm not going to pretend she's not going to have harder questions as she gets older, about what we are and what that means for our lives. She'll need real answers." "I know." Victoria held her cup in both hands. "I'm not going to pretend I know exactly how to be. Whatever the right thing is to be. To her. I don't have a model for it, but I'm not going to run from the question." "That's enough," he said. "That's genuinely enough." She looked at him across the kitchen table in her apartment, the city doing its nighttime thing outside the windows, Lily asleep in the next room. She was not the version of herself that ran quarterly projections and managed board members, and had built a company from 6 years of relentless precision. She was the other version, the one that had existed in the late-night conversations and the parking lot by the lake and the careful Fridays that had slowly become something real. The version that only a small number of people had ever gotten close enough to see. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "What?" "I've spent a long time building things. The company, the structure of my life. All of it designed around the idea that if I built correctly enough and worked hard enough and maintained control of the important variables, the outcome would be what I wanted it to be." She paused. "And that's true, to a point. But I miss the thing where the most important variables aren't controllable. They're just people who choose or don't choose." "Yes, you chose," she said. "Every time there was a door you built, you also stayed. That wasn't accidental." "No. I chose too. I want to keep choosing." She looked at him directly. "I'm saying this badly." "You're saying it fine." She set down her cup. "I want a life. Not just a company and an apartment and my mother's eventual approval and a board that's satisfied with my performance. I want an actual life with mess in it, and a kid with strong opinions about bread, and someone who notices things." She stopped. "I want this." He looked at her across the kitchen table and thought about the career fair and the coffee cups and the 7 fake emergencies and the parking lot and the 30 days and all the small increments of choosing the same direction. And he thought about what he understood now that he hadn't understood when he was building the door over and over. That love was not a risk you calculated your way into safely. It was a thing you chose with full knowledge of the cost, and then chose again, and the choosing was the whole point. "Me too," he said. She reached across the table, and this time it wasn't the uncertain gesture from the early dinners, the brief contact that left space for retreat. She just took his hand, straightforwardly, like someone who has decided to stop being careful about the things that matter. They sat like that in the quiet kitchen while Lily slept in the next room and the city pressed up against the glass outside. 3 months later, in April, Ryan was promoted to VP of Operations. The announcement went through the standard HR process, was reviewed by the board, and was reported in the same financial trade publication that had run the 3-paragraph item in November. This time with a headline that described the promotion as a recognition of the Singapore restructuring and the Q4 results. Henderson voted against it. 6 others voted for it. That was the whole story. He told Lily at dinner that night, and she said, "Does that mean you get a bigger office?" "Probably." "Can you put my drawings in it?" "Yes." "Okay," she said. "Can I have more pasta?" He served her more pasta. Victoria sent him a text at 9 p.m. that said simply, "You earned it. Everything you have, you earned." He looked at that for a while before he wrote back. He was sitting at the kitchen table, Lily already in bed, the apartment around him holding its ordinary quiet. The permission slip had been under the magnet for 4 days, and he'd been meaning to sign it and hadn't. He signed it now. He thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago at the career fair, in the jacket that was slightly too small, doing the math on $43 worth of antibiotics. He'd built from that. Not because the conditions were right, or because anyone had smoothed the path, or because it had been easy. He'd built because building was what you did when you had someone depending on you and no other acceptable option, and the building had taught him things that you couldn't learn any other way. He'd learned that showing up mattered more than performing, that reliable was a deeper form of strength than impressive, that the years you spent holding things together quietly were not wasted years. They were the years that made you into someone who could hold the important things. He'd learned that love did not announce itself in the moments you expected. It arrived sideways in the accumulated weight of ordinary presence, in the noticing, in the staying when the staying was inconvenient. He'd been in the middle of it for 2 years before he let himself see it, and even then it took a sidewalk in front of a restaurant and a question he almost didn't answer honestly. He thought about Lily in the next room, 7 years old with strong opinions about every category of thing, drawing a sky with 4 different blues for someone who hadn't had drawings on her fridge before and now did, 5 of them pinned in a slightly uneven row, visible from the kitchen. He thought about what it meant to be chosen, not evaluated and assessed and found acceptable, not tolerated or accommodated, chosen plainly by someone who knew the full cost and made the calculation anyway. He wrote back to Victoria, "I know, you did too." She sent back a single word, "Yes." He put his phone down and sat in the kitchen and listened to the quiet of his apartment and thought that this was what people meant when they used the word home. Not a place exactly, or not only a place. The quality of a life where the things that mattered were present and the people you loved were close enough to reach. He hadn't planned any of it. He'd shown up to a career fair in a jacket that didn't fit and noticed things, and the noticing had led to everything else. That was probably the closest thing to a philosophy he had. Pay attention. Stay honest. Don't mistake caution for wisdom when what's actually called for is courage. He hadn't been perfect at any of it. He'd built doors he shouldn't have built and held things at distance that deserved to be held close, and he'd let the fear of losing what he had keep him from reaching for what he needed. He was still working on all of it. He expected he would be for a long time, but the permission slip was signed. Lily was asleep with the certainty of a child whose world was stable. Victoria's name was on his phone, and her drawings were on his daughter's wall, and there was a dinner on Sunday that nobody was going to cancel. Ryan Carter turned off the kitchen lamp. He walked to the hallway. He pushed Lily's door open slightly and looked at her in the dark, the small shape of her under the blanket, the drawings on the wall catching the light from the hallway. She'd done the sky in 4 different blues, just like she said. It was, objectively, the best part of the mural. He pulled the door almost closed, the same motion he'd made 10,000 times. He went to bed. Outside, Chicago did what Chicago did, vast and indifferent and full of lives being lived, all of them complicated, most of them ordinary, each one carrying its own weight of love and fear and the daily work of choosing what mattered. The city didn't know or care about any single story inside it. It just kept going, the way cities do. But inside the apartment, in the quiet after the lamp went off, something was present that hadn't always been. Not perfect, not finished, not free of the work that tomorrow would bring. Just real and chosen. and enough. That was all it had ever needed to be.